Good morning, everybody. Welcome. It is 9 o'clock, and we have quite an agenda in front of us this morning. I want to welcome everybody to the, this is a special meeting, a February 13th meeting for the Regional Transportation Commission of Washoe County. Today we're here to discuss I think the biggest agenda, obviously, is to discuss the interview process for our next executive director of the RTC. So with that, what I will have, Madam Clerk, can you give us a roll call, please?
Certainly. Ron Smith?
Here.
Oscar Delgado?
Here.
Yvonne Hartung?
Here.
Neil Majardin? Here. Bob Lucy?
Here.
Zev Kaplan?
Here.
Dale Ferguson?
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Moreno, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance this morning?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Moreno. So it's been an interesting week for a lot of us. We've had a lot going on within our community, but probably the most important thing in my mind is the loss of a very, very important figure within who I would consider an icon, somebody who's been very important, not just to the region, but also to the RTC. He's been instrumental in a number of the projects that we did within our region. He's responsible for so many great things. He was a friend to me, a mentor to me. I was close to the family. And I'd like to take a minute this morning on behalf of the Washoe RTC and the members of the RTC to observe a moment of silence in memory of our former mayor, Bob Cashel. Thank you, everybody. So now let's move on to the fun stuff. At this time, I'm looking for an approval of the agenda as posted. I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next we have public input. This morning I have 3 individuals signed in. So what this is, please speak to anything on or off the agenda. You are limited to 3 minutes. I'll call you down, and if you could queue up down here. First I have John Locke.
Morning.
Good morning.
How are you all doing this morning?
Good.
Happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you.
Just wanted to talk today. I'm a driver for the RTC ride. I've read all of the resumes of the applicants applying for the executive director's position. My personal opinion, I think Amy has the better qualifications. Her resume stood out above all of the others. As far as Mr. Abul is concerned, I read his resume. I wasn't impressed. He only has 3 to 4 years in each one of his positions that he's held. As I brought up earlier last year, that he was terminated in Alaska. I don't see the qualifications from his resume that I saw from the others. Amy, she's been working with the board for quite a few years. She has more qualifications than anybody. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next I have Morgan Traeger. Welcome, Morgan.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to comment this morning. My name is Morgan Trieger, and I'm on the board of the Truckee Meadows Bicycle Alliance. I would like to speak to you today, first, not about any specific candidate, but instead about the one quality I think you should value above all others in selecting the next RTC Executive Director. There are many qualities which an effective executive director must have, but it will take true courage to develop and implement the policies and plans which will help us create a safer, more environmentally friendly, and equitable transportation system for our growing community. It will take courage because in order to achieve the ambitious but necessary goals we as a community have set for ourselves, including zero fatalities, reducing greenhouse gas emissions from transportation, and increasing alternative mode share, we must shift how we think about our transportation network. It will take courage to say that to reduce automobile congestion on the roadways, we must prioritize all other modes before the personal vehicle. It will take courage to say that despite the hype and great potential surrounding electric vehicles, EVs alone will not achieve our goals of reducing transportation-related greenhouse gases. It will take courage to recognize that the way we have constructed bicycle facilities in this community has not significantly increased bicycling in the city, and that in order to attract people out of their cars and onto a bicycle or other micromobility option, we must build bicycle facilities that most people actually feel comfortable using. In short, it will take courage to state that we must transition towards using the NACTO All Ages and Abilities Bicycle Design Guidelines on all of our roadways, and most importantly, it will take courage to implement it. This design guidance is being implemented in major cities across the continent with enormous success. For example, the city of Vancouver increased their rates of bicycling to work by over 40% in just 5 years after constructing a simple all ages and abilities network in their downtown core. In contrast, as a community, we have been constructing mostly bike lanes in an ad hoc, piecemeal manner on high-speed roadways for nearly 15 years. As the total number of miles of bike lanes have grown, the bicycle mode share has barely changed. Although the RTC and the cities of Reno and Sparks have been encouraging residents to use their bicycles instead of their personal vehicles through public information campaigns and building the facilities that we do have, we as a community have not seen a significant rise in bicycling rates, and thus we have not achieved any significant greenhouse gas reductions or modal shifts. Our high-stress and fragmented bicycle network is utilized largely by residents who are already strong cyclists and those who may have no other transportation options. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Joanna Trieger.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to comment today. I'm Joanna Trieger. I'm also on the board of the Truckee Meadows Bicycle Alliance, and this is a follow-on from Morgan's comment. Today, we're at the precipice of a fundamental change in how we understand, design, and construct our bicycle network as a community. This fundamental change is the simple acknowledgement that for bicycling to be a viable transportation option for the majority of residents, we have to build facilities that the majority of residents will actually use. Studies have shown, and our recent poll of UNR students, staff, and faculty have indicated that reducing the level of traffic stress for bicyclists by adding either vertical or horizontal separation from vehicles will make any facility feel more comfortable to the average person and will attract more bicyclists. Physically protected facilities have been shown to increase cycling rates by 250 to 450%, and to reduce vehicle and bicycle collision rates by 38%. When even a basic network of protected bike facilities is constructed, the share of cycling trips increases significantly across the entire city. With nearly half of all personal trips in the US being 3 miles or less, that's a distance easily bikeable, it's no wonder that if biking is safe and comfortable, people will do it. So why is this so important to our future? The transportation sector accounts for a significant portion of greenhouse gas emissions in the US, which are warming our planet, changing our climate, and threatening our way of life. The state, the city, and RTC have been active in setting goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I don't know how we'll achieve all of these goals, and I know the governor, the cities of Reno and Sparks, the RTC, and many other agencies are working to make it happen. But in regard to the goal of reducing greenhouse gases from the transportation sector by 2030 across the state, it's important to note that relying almost exclusively on electric vehicles while neglecting the enormous potential of bicycle lanes is myopic and an act of hubris. We support any mode that reduces greenhouse gas emissions, but the real data show that electric vehicles accounted for just 1.8% of all cars sold in March 2019, and are projected to account for just 20% of all vehicles sold and 7% of cars and light-duty trucks in the US by 2030. Electric vehicles can't be the only solution to reducing greenhouse gases, so we have to actively incorporate and support other forms of emissions-free transportation like biking and transit, and we do that by building networks that are safe, efficient, equitable, and connected, so you can actually get where you're going in a reasonable amount of time. We're beginning to see the start of a protected network with Center Street and Audie Wells, but we have to keep building on this network. To have a chance to achieve significant GHG reductions, safety improvements, quality of life benefits, a more connected community, and public health benefits, we have to take seriously the fact that people will only bicycle in significant numbers if we build a network in which they feel comfortable and safe while riding. So the question is, which of the 5 candidates is best suited to this task? We at the Truckee Meadows Bicycle Alliance welcome the opportunity to work with any of the highly qualified candidates before us, but we're confident that Amy has the experience and, most importantly, the courage to bring this agency and this community where we need to go. Thank you for hearing these comments, and we look forward to working with you all and with the next executive director in the years ahead.
Thank you. Seeing no further public comment, is there anybody else at this time that would just like to speak under public comment? All right, seeing that we have none, we will close. Gotcha, okay. No. So we've received no, we're not, since we will close public comment at this time, and we will move on to our agenda item 3. So with that in mind, we are here to move on to conduct the RTC Executive Director interviews. So I'm going to walk everybody through this process. I'm going to invite Angela Reich, who's been helping me and Mr. Carlson along the way. We've been doing this for the last about a month and 2 months since we've started this process. This process is a process that myself and Commissioner Hartung have used previously, and when we've done it, when we've done selections at the Washoe County Commission, and feel that this is a very effective process. We've seen it work in a number of different fashions. So the way it will go today is that we have 5 applicants for the position, and those 5 applicants will all get equal time today to interview in front of the board in a public process. This process this morning was selected. There was at random an order on which the candidates will go this morning. I have just received that from Ms. Reich, and that is ready to, we'll announce those individuals here shortly. What I would request of the candidates this morning is that you are not mandatorily required to sequester yourself during the interview process of the other candidates. However, what I would ask of you is that you voluntarily sequester yourself, and Mr. Moreno and staff will help you, escort you to another room while each candidate speaks. After you've completed your interview this morning, you're welcome to stay for the remainder of the interviews to hear, but we just don't want to give anybody an unfair advantage to say something or respond differently as from what board questions have already been asked. The board will listen to a 5-minute interview or a 10-minute, actually, Ms. Reich, I'll actually let you walk through it. Will you do that for me?
Absolutely.
Thank
Angela
you.
Reich, Director of Administrative Services for the record. Good morning, Commissioners, Chairman Lucy. The interview process will be conducted as followed. Each candidate will be given a maximum of 10 minutes to provide an introduction, which includes background, capabilities, and why they're interested in the position. Then each commissioner will be asking questions. The candidates will be given a total of 15-minute response time. So Ms. Thompson will be watching the clock, and any time that the commissioners take to ask the questions will not be included in the 15 minutes. And then finally, each candidate will have closing comments of up to 5 minutes. So each candidate will be given a total of 30 minutes, in total time.
Great.
And then we'll proceed to the nomination process.
Great, thank you. And so with the nomination process, once all candidates have gone through the process and interviewed in front of the board, the board will have an opportunity to deliberate, and then we will go through a voting process. Each commissioner has been provided with a list of names and a ballot this morning. Each commissioner will be asked at that time after deliberation to vote for 2 candidates, not prioritizing either one, just voting for their 2 top candidates out of the pool of 5. Those candidates, and then we would ask that each commissioner sign that ballot, and those ballots will then be collected by the clerk. She will read the names and then provide us with the results of that voting process. If at that time we have a clear winner, we will move forward with a motion to accept that individual. If we do not have a clear winner and there is a tie, we will go to a second round. And in the second round of voting, each commissioner will be allowed to pick one candidate in that second round, and then the clerk, should at that time have a clear and decisive leader in that. So with that process, just a nod of the head by all 5 candidates. Is that acceptable by all 5 of you? Perfect. Thank you. So with that being said, we'll move right into the interviews, and I'm going to list this off first. Our first candidate this morning that'll be interviewing with us is Mr. John Flansburgh. So at this time, before Mr. Flansburgh gets going, I would ask the remainder of candidates if you would follow Mr. Moreno. He will take you up, and we will sequester you, and we will call you so enjoy your times, and we'll see you shortly. Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Flansburgh. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
All right. So with that being said, sir, the floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, it's an honor to be here today. It truly is. I have really looked forward to this opportunity. The Roman philosopher Seneca has said that luck is where preparation meets opportunity. The opportunity today is to be selected as the next Regional Transportation Commission Executive Director. I'd like to talk about my preparation. I graduated from Oregon State University in civil engineering. I worked for Granite Construction Company. I have a little bit of an unusual background that actually kind of builds and fits into the position that is here today. I worked for Granite Construction as a project engineer, project manager, and estimator. As I learned the construction trade, I did a lot of contracts here in this area. I worked for NDOT, worked for a lot of the cities and public works agencies. I learned from the ground all the different things that goes into the construction project. And as I worked on those areas, I kept building responsibility and kept getting promoted. I was estimated projects, started with $1 million projects, went to multi-million-dollar projects. I've worked on major freeways. I've worked worked in Fallon at the Naval Air Station, redoing their runway for their Top Gun school. I worked on I built a large regional park in Gardnerville. I just had a lot of different varied experiences, both in airports and in public works. I went to work for Carson City in 1997. My first day, I got a call to be at Fire Station number 1 at 5 a.m. under incident command. It was January 2nd, 1997. We all remember that day. I had accepted the position. I stayed with Granite through the end of the year, and then it was going to start. And usually you think of your first day starting as kind of getting to know things. My first day was reporting into the regional EOC on all the different areas of flooding that I saw. That really helped me to understand the frailties of our public infrastructure. At Carson City, I was the street superintendent, responsible for all the street maintenance activities. I also finished and completed my professional engineer, received my professional engineering certificate at that time. And I had the opportunity to be in front of the Regional Transportation Commission of Carson City. Shortly thereafter, I became the lead staff person, and I oversaw all of the capital projects that were happening with the city, as well as the maintenance and responsibilities that I had previously. Also took on the operation of the Carson City landfill at that time. It was a whole new operation. It was under a private contractor. They had come in with their estimate. The health director had asked me to take a look to see if he thought the prices were reasonable, and I submitted what I felt was a reasonable price, and we ended up taking that operation over successfully. I only bring that up to say that I have extensive experience in both operations and construction. In the 2000 census, Carson City was determined to be hit Metropolitan Planning Organization status. So I was tasked with the lead on that. I worked with Jerry Hall as a consultant, and he came down and helped us, but we set up the Metropolitan Planning Organization. In that process, it also included a portion of Douglas County and a portion of Lyon County. So that was a collaborative effort, and that was a unique thing to go through. It was also very unique as I started working with federal highways and federal transit on our plan, just understanding what that process would mean. And I think there was a lot of growth there. I was able to set that up, and also our first transit system, Jump Around Carson, or JAC. That system that we put into place is still there today and has not changed all that much, meaning that it's been built upon, but it's similar to what we've had there. I then came to City of Reno as the Deputy Public Works Director. Was in that position for 4 years before being promoted to Director. And that is where most of you know me today. I've served as the Director of Public Works for the City of Reno for over 10 years. In that process, I have met a lot of people and I have developed a lot of relationships. I want to talk a little bit about my thinking and how it's evolved over time. When I first began in my career, I was mostly interested in the efficiency of the operations. As that efficiency and making sure that we were cost effective in the private industry, but that moved into the quality of the projects. And then it became, how good can we get at the work that we do? One of the projects I had was in Washoe Valley. We repaved the whole section through Washoe Valley. It must have been about 1995. There was a profile index of 5 inches per mile, and that was considered to be very difficult to get, meaning the smoothness of the road. We achieved a 1/2 inch per mile as our average. We kept working with the crew to see just how good we could get on the quality of that part. As I transitioned in my thinking from just looking at the quality, it started looking into not just the projects, but developing the people and how important it is the people are to us. It became more fun building them and seeing them grow. And I've had the opportunity in the City of Reno to work with a lot of great staff and to see their growth, particularly when I look at the Virginia Street Bridge. That project had 3 main people involved. Charla Honey, who oversaw the project management, or the project development, Carrie Lanza, who oversaw the environmental permitting, and then Carrie Koski, who was the project manager and saw the project through completion. My role was more of a collaborative nature. I was the one that was working with the different entities to get the funding needed for that project. And one of the very great parts about that project that I'm proud of is the collaboration that we had before Federal Highways and NDOT to get all of the bridge funding for 1 complete year in Nevada towards that project. For the Truckee River Flood Project, and to be able to get the funding primarily because of the flood benefits that project was going to receive. To have the support of the Regional Transportation Commission for funding there, and then also the local funding. Finally, my thinking is involved into collaboration. All of us are smarter than some of us, and certainly one of us. So I have appreciated the opportunity I've had to collaborate with others. An example of my collaboration has been the work in North Valleys. We have had a tough time up there. We had the storms of 2017, and we had the flooding, and I thought we had the best response that we have had since I've been at the City of Reno, responding to those floods in 2017 on the river and how we took care of things. And then time was going by, and we had more storms and more storms and more storms, and we realized that our problem was no longer in the Truckee River Basin. It was up in North Valleys because those storms kept adding into those closed basins. We have worked well with Washoe County, with the Airport Authority, and I'm proud to say that we have the dewatering project at Swan Lake. The pipeline's completed, the farmer's getting started, and look forward to turning the water on here shortly and starting that process. But that was a long collaboration in a difficult situation. I think that's important. The RTC has evolved as well. When I first came to the City of Reno, the RTC was performing all their projects lip of gutter to lip of gutter. It was all about pavement condition index. It was all about, because that's what the voters had voted for, we wanted to make sure that we could fix our roads, and that's what was needed at that time. Later, we started introducing elements of complete streets. In the complete street process, now we start actually looking at ADA, and that was my first real concern when we were just doing lip of gutter, lip of gutter. Coming from Carson City, I'd worked with Department of Justice, just on some ADA issues in Carson City. I knew what the verdict was in Sacramento and what they were having to do in Sacramento because of not meeting ADA requirements. And I was concerned we were falling in a similar pattern here. And that changed. And we started looking more at ADA, and we started looking more at the sidewalks into the customers. Finally, I would say today, we are in complete streets that's not limited, but almost unlimited, but constrained, because we have a right-of-way that we have to be constrained within. But we're looking at every aspect, and I think really that's kind of where we need to be, and I feel good about where we are in today's looking at these different complete streets. I would like to see us move one, not a step, I'd like to see us change our perception of what we do. I'd like to see us become more customer-focused. And I'm not talking about customer service, because customer service is reactionary. I'm talking about customer experience. And I'd like to see us move forward in changing our customer experience and improving that customer experience. And that customer could be our commute coming in. That customer could be the pedestrian, the bicyclist. It could be the visitor that's coming in the Reno Tahoe Airport. I think there's opportunities for us to collaborate with the Reno Sparks Visitors Authority. I think there's availability for us to collaborate with Reno Tahoe Airport Authority if we look through it in a customer experience lens. And that concludes my opening comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flansburgh. So, Mr. Flansburgh, now we'll move into your first Q&A period. So each commissioner will have an opportunity to ask you a question. You won't, as you've been told, that you will not be penalized for the time of their asking. So if you please manage your time as you see fit. All right. So I'll start down at the very end. Mr. Mayor, if you are ready to go, I will turn it over to Mr. Mayor Smith.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. John, a great application, nice presentation. My question is there anything in the RTC's future or happening currently with the RTC that would trigger a conflict of interest for you?
You know, I appreciate that question. When I was working for Granite Construction Company and I was transitioning to the street superintendent position, when I was at Granite, it was an employee stock ownership. And so we received stock into the company. When I left and went to Carson City, the very first thing I did was sold my stock and turned it into a 401k, into just a general mutual fund, precisely because I didn't want to have any thought or thing out there. I'm awarding contracts. The low bidder could be Granite Construction Company, but it would look bad. Conflict of interest. My son is a civil engineer. He graduated. I'm very proud of him. It sucks to be the son of the Public Works Director of the City of Reno if you want to work in the City of Reno or if you want to work in this area. I'm proud to say that he is very successful. He's in the Salt Lake City area, and he is doing fabulous. And that is just one other area of those shades of things that people will talk. Some people may say, well, John, he's the Public Works Director of the City of Reno. He's going to come to RTC. He's going to be Reno-centric. I think you can talk to Neil Kreutz and John Martini. I think you can talk to Dave Solero and Kate Thomas. I think you can talk to Mark Forey and John Enlow. John Flansburgh isn't a Reno-centric only person. John Flansburgh is a collaborator, and he is what's out there, what's best for the community, what's best for the customer at the end.
Thank you, John.
Commissioner Delgado.
Thank you, Chairman. Great presentation, John. Great resume as well. My question is more around, and I think we worked several years about this, but I tend to look at our environment, believe that our built environment has a direct impact on our overall health. So I tend to start looking at things through a health lens. Can you talk to me a little bit on how you would apply through the health lens, how you'd see our infrastructure changing to have better impacts on our overall community?
Thank you for that. Audie Wells. I'm tickled pink with Audie Wells. That is an area that we have a corridor that links our two communities. It's an east-west connection that we need to have more of. You know, we have a freeway, but getting on that freeway and then getting off, you know what you're up against. If we can build some of those nice east-west corridors, and we have some, I mean, but Audie Wells, we really take that corridor and have the raised cycle track separated from the walking
to be able to put the lights in there, that we have not only the tall lights for lighting up the street and the safety there, but the smaller ones that are going to light both the path for pedestrian and the bicyclists. I'm thrilled, and I think those are the kind of things, we are too sedentary. We need opportunities to be more mobile, and that project is going to give us lots of opportunities to be more mobile. And as we link those projects together, it's like putting the Legos down on the thing to build out your roads. We're building those, and we're going to create those linkages. So I agree that in order to improve our health, we need to have better facilities. Midtown's another great example. We had narrow sidewalks. You had driveway depressions. It was horrible. We went through there and did kind of the best job we could, knowing what the project that was coming forward, just to make the ADA compatible. But now, look what we're going to have. And I think that leads back to this customer experience. If we can look through the customer experience lens, I love to go on walks with my wife in the evening, and we have a great place to go do that at. And those are the types of things that will get people out there, become less sedentary, and actually get them talking to each other maybe. And that would be good too. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Delgado. Commissioner Hartung.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Flansburgh, thank you for applying. I truly appreciate it. Given the growing needs of the region and the shrinking fuel tax, even with indexing, how will you lead the organization to secure additional funding that's going to be required in the future?
So, funding. We are the envy of the nation when they know and understand what we've done here. And that indexing is extremely important. We're not losing against inflation in terms of that. What we are losing against is we're having more electric vehicles, which are great, but they also use the road. They're also road users. We need to find a way to make sure that they're paying their fair share as well. We're getting greater fuel economy, which is great. That's what we need to have. But as we get greater fuel economy, we're also shrinking the fuel tax. It's outdated in how we do our funding. We need to have a better funding source. We need to have a more equitable funding source and something that is also going to weather these changes that we're seeing. I've thought about funding a lot. I'm concerned in funding in two different ways. As we're funded today in Washoe County, and we see our indexing increase and do what it needs to do, we need the rest of the counties around us and the whole state, for that matter, on board with us. But it's not just the whole state. We need the entire nation to be more lined into the thinking that we have here. So when you talk about funding, it's something I think about a lot. Because if we don't get that alignment and we don't have our neighbors also in alignment and theirs is raising up similarly to take care of all their needs, because guess what? They don't have the needs that they can't take care of their needs as well. Having worked on the maintenance side of things for a long time, I have a very good idea of where we stand on our roads, and we've had great technologies like the microsurfacing and some things like that have helped to give us more time, but we still have a great amount of need. So the funding is going to be big, and when you ask about what am I going to do to lead, I think I'm going to collaborate with my neighbors. Southern Nevada has put a part into place, but I believe it has a sunset. So we need to work on that as our community reaching out into the state, and then ideally beyond.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Flansburgh. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Hartung. Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you. Good morning, John.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here. It certainly has been my honor to have worked with you for the last, 7+ years, and I've always found you to be very professional, always ethical, and I've always appreciated your very even approach. So I just wanted to get that on the record. So when we started in this process, we knew from both the examples of what we were looking for, not only the qualifications from an educational standpoint, but the experience and what we wanted to see. We solicited input from the community. And what I certainly found in this, what I thought was very good response from the community as to what they wanted to see in their next executive director, was very diverse, as is the position. So my question is going to be somewhat multifaceted. I'm kind of cheating in my question a little bit here, but it's also very specific. Please provide us an example of a time when you have brought together diverse individuals, entities, politicians, and funding to bring a project to fruition, being specific in the entities, the individuals, and the project.
Wow, there are several examples. The Virginia Street Bridge, of course, comes to mind. You had everything, you know, people love the Virginia Street Bridge. It had emotional attachment. We understand that. To be able to remove that bridge and bring in a different design was something that was going to be completely thinking different than what we had. We couldn't have the arches back in the river. That was the part that was causing the flooding. We had debris. We were having to put equipment up there and move logs and stuff that were coming down the river during flooding events. We had a dilapidated bridge. It wasn't going to hold up. Everything about that bridge that we loved was just old and tired, and we needed to do something different. So from state historic preservation and the work to say, okay, if we're going to retire this bridge, it's not going to look like this bridge, but what can it look like? Doing the historical analysis to understand, well, we used to have an arched bridge here. What can we, you know, the arch on the top, for instance. Again, I mentioned earlier in my opening comments about the funding sources. We had to find the funding. So I tell people a lot of times, know what you want, know how you want it, and ask for it just that way. The knowing what we wanted was easy because we wanted something that wasn't going to cause flooding. The getting into the details of that was very difficult. Knowing how we wanted it, well, now if we're going to get that up, we're going to have to affect both sides, and we're going to have to raise that elevation. So now you're dealing with all the adjacent property owners, and I mean, there was just a lot of things that were difficult about that project. Working with federal highways, and I have never had another project that had two federal co-leads. And here you have federal highways and Army Corps of Engineers. You know, that's red tape. When you take red tape and you add red tape, it's really hard to break it. We had to do a lot of things with our coordination. Project took a little bit longer in the development, but I think that was the key. We took the time in the development of the project, so when we actually got to construction of the project, it went very fast. And so I would say that that was an example of having the diverse. I'm going to give one more example because I think I have enough time to do so. Carson City Freeway. My first day was the '97 flood. I saw where the problems were. We had water roaring out of those canyons. It was that Pineapple Express on top of a big snow cap. And I saw the areas where we were filling up and had just massive erosion was occurring. So we needed to find a place where we could actually have that erosion keep, but then have the water continue to flow. The Carson City Freeway gave us the opportunity to actually have a freeway with a storm water backbone underneath it. And that water carries the water away from the mountain over towards the Lampa Ranch, which then goes into the Carson River, flows down the Carson River. That was the low point for the Carson Valley, or the Eagle Valley. So that was another one that was very difficult environmentally, getting things set up, but so satisfying in the need. And I had the opportunity to work on the full development, being the chief liaison with Jim Gallegos at the state, who was the project manager for that, and then seeing it almost to full construction while I was at Carson City. It finished the year after I left.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Flansburgh, it's been a distinct honor for me to serve on this board with, as you can see, a very diverse group of individuals that see transportation in many, many different facets. Over the last 5 years, I've had the unique experience to serve with Mr. Gibson in his capacity as executive director. And one of the things that he taught me, and one of the challenges that we worked on together quite often, were the federal and state challenges. I accompanied him and staff to DC and Carson City to deal with the federal agencies and the state agencies who play a very, very intimate role in what we do here at the RTC day in and day out. Specifically in the region, we work with NDOT and the municipalities. But when you also think about the major freeways that travel through our community, if you were to become the executive director, how would you, as an individual, deal with the federal challenges as it pertains to funding, securing grants, working on legislation with the federal government and state governments?
So my role to this date has primarily been seeing what the federal legislation has come out with, and then trying to tie the needs of the community and different projects of where possible grant funding or different funding sources may fit in. And I think that's important because I've seen a variety of different capital projects. They have different needs in the community with limited funds to fund those projects. And being creative in terms of how you look at those different programs that are out there and how you might be able to find the funding to fit those programs. The challenge and the opportunity that comes with that is having seen all those and having seen what the needs in the community are, being able to actually communicate that back up to those who are making the policies, helping to draft some of those policies, working with our delegation and with their lead staff people to create those policies for the projects that we not only have on the books today, but the ones that we see coming forward in the future. And so I think my perspective, having seen what those needs are and then being able to fit those needs into the varying buckets, if you will, of money that might be available with the different strings that come attached are important. The other part of that comes from getting a great understanding from our delegation and from our lobby group on what the nation is trying to drive towards and what are the goals they're trying to meet. And if we work from both ends, our needs and what we see going forward, what the federal government is looking to, what kind of programs and things that they're trying to establish, and what they're setting up funding sources to incentivize us to take advantage of, and connecting the dots so that our railroad tracks line together and aren't offset. That, I think, I can bring a very unique perspective to, and we'll look forward to that challenge.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Flansburgh. So, Mr. Flansburgh, you have about 4 minutes left in your time. I'm going to ask if there is any follow-up questions by any of the commissioners that they would like to ask at this time. Mr. Mayor, Mr. Delgado, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you very much. So many,
There you go.
sorry, have to work the mic first. So many follow-up questions, but mine is actually in a different vein. We always struggle here at the RTC to marry our limited funds, which fuel tax cannot go to transit, with our ever-growing transit needs. From both a financing standpoint and a technology standpoint, how would you suggest that we could move forward to meet those growing needs, given our funding constraints?
The funding for transit, obviously there are federal programs that we have been very successful, the RTC has been very successful to tap into to help out with those. But those are for capital. They're for building up the system and giving your backbone. They're not for operating. And that's where we always come into the crux of, is in the operations. I really like the microtransit. I had actually looked at that and then was kind of pleased to see that it's come here. With microtransit, though, you're at the edges of things. You're picking, less I should say populated, or where those needs are, and you have to kind of set those up. You can't really say needs because the needs are all over, but you're trying to find where the concentrated need is that you can fit and be more efficient at. But bringing in those the microtransit and then into the larger hubs and making those transfers as quickly as possible, I think, is important. When I think about transit, I think about things like the rapid transit, that speed. And that's great, and we have large vehicles, and we have longer distances, and we have great places for people to get on and off, and that is good. It's faster. We also need to be thinking about the customer experience being faster in how they are ticketed and how they make sure that they pay, but they have multiple ways of getting on, so faster onboarding and offboarding. I think about frequency, and that's where the operations, that's where it gets tough, right? Because it's the frequency, how often do these buses need to ride? And if they ride less often, I need bigger buses. If they ride more often, maybe I could have smaller buses. In those different mixes. In the microtransit, what size of vehicle do we need? Is it going to be the larger buses, or is it going to be maybe a smaller bus with more frequent, faster trips? I can't say that I have this great, grand idea of how we're going to meet those operating costs unless up until we get more support from the voters. Because we've gone to the voters a couple times, we've had some success and some we have not. And so I think demonstrating what that need is, getting the whole community with an understanding of how that transit might be built out, getting greater opportunities with the microtransit for bringing people in closer to actually be able to use the transit. There's something else I was thinking in regards to this. And this is a little bit outside the box, but Reno Tahoe Airport Authority, they have, they're running out of parking. I don't know if you've taken very many trips lately. You have a hard time finding a spot in the airport lot, even if you want to stay there for a few days. There's going to be a need for some parking somewhere else. Is there an opportunity for that visitor experience and for our residents' experience that they might want to park somewhere else and then take a shuttle in to the airport that would be available? So I think when we look at the transit, and that could have a different cost model, right? I think we need to look at what the service we provide today for our most vulnerable that we need to make sure that we're providing and that they're getting. But we also need to take a look at there's other opportunities where we can provide that maybe it's a boutique type service that has a higher cost that we recoup that actually helps to pay for maybe some of the other costs that we have.
Thank you.
Chairman,
Yeah, Mr. Delgado.
so one follow-up question, really quick. I know this is hot on everyone's minds too, is the pedestrian safety issues that we have in our region, or some immediate maybe steps that you see are opportunities, possibilities. I know we're doing a lot of work now, but love to hear your thoughts in terms of the immediate, the short term, and the long. Thank you.
I really appreciate that the conversation has changed from the government needs to do something to we have greater accountability in all. And I think that has been a very important change in that process. That being said, we need to have better lighting, better lit crosswalks. We need to have better education so that we're teaching. Make that eye contact. Make sure before you cross that street, drivers, be alert, and make sure you're seeing that.
Yeah, we'll let you finish and submit your thoughts, Mr. Flansburgh, on that.
So I think that some of the things that we have been doing, they're up in flashing beacons to light things up, but then people have to push the button, right? So in the overall lighting, I think that the design of our streets is very important. We had a conversation yesterday about having speed humps, maybe near some of our schools, maybe not on our highest traveled roads, but maybe on some of the other roads. When you go by a school, maybe some speed humps going through there to just alert people you're coming into a higher pedestrian zone. We need to make it cognizant both for the driver coming in as well as the pedestrians and share that accountability. But anything we can do to give better cues would also be helpful.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Flansburgh, that concludes our Q&A section of your interview this morning. So in your final comments, you are allowed 5 minutes, so please, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. If you ever want to know how something works, specifically in operations, you follow the money. I've told people that many, many times. I looked at the RTC budget. Your budget has 3 programs. Your street and highway program is 62% of your budget. Your public transportation is 36% of your budget. And your planning is 2% of your budget, and that planning is extremely important. But that's how the money sets up in this program. I have great experience in the construction. I understand from the contractor side, I understand from the owner's perspective of what needs to happen in the construction projects and what we can do to partner and make those projects even better. On public transportation, I have extensive operations experience. I did set up the transit, and it's a small transit system down in Carson City, but I also had the opportunity to collaborate with Jacob Snow in Southern Nevada, with Greg Kraus in Reno, or the RTC here in Washoe County, and with our other transit operators in the region. So I think that I'm not intimidated by that. I also know that we have a private transportation provider, and that they have a lot of things that they're responsible. So you're also administering that contract. And the planning side, I've had a lot of work with planning, both planning of projects, project development, the transportation planning that I did in Carson City for many years. So I'm not intimidated by that or the other work that would go with reaching out to our federal and state individuals. I would like to state I'm regionally minded, and so I, as I mentioned before, and I will collaborate with all of the entities. Finally, I want to spend the rest of my time on the customer experience. When I think of the automobile and the automobile traffic, that's very important. We move a lot of people and go long distances and a lot of freight and a lot of things. I've had concerns about our transportation model in the past, and when I see some of the projects that come out, and I'm kind of scratching my head a little bit and say, well, is that really that important? Because I really see some things going on over here. We have the opportunity in the customer experience to look at using floating cell data is one thing. There's crowdsourcing. I don't need to know every vehicle on the freeway or on this large major road that how fast they're going and how many cars are going. But if I know that I've got 15 that are traveling 35 miles an hour on I-580 South, I know that I got a problem, and I can verify from that from congestion. The technology is out there right now for us to be able to determine where that congestion is. If we can take that congestion, we can match it up to our models. Our models will then be able to say, it'll validate those models. Because right now we have a lot of input that goes into our model, but the output doesn't always make sense to us. This is a way for it to also make sense to us, and we can bounce that back and forth. We can also see varying trends. I think the Southeast Connector was a great example of that. We put the Southeast Connector, and it's a major roadway people like to ride really fast on. It's a major roadway that connects our community in a way that has not been connected before. And so this is an opportunity for us. We use this technology also to see how the patterns are changing of where people are traveling. I think that's an opportunity for us to improve the customer experience. I think of visitors coming in, and I did some travel recently, and just, you have that experience when you're going to airports and you're riding rail and public transportation and different things. We need to look at that as from a staff level and leading. We need to lead with the customer always in mind and what that customer experience is going to be. I was thinking about something else, a need in our group. We need to collaborate not just with our agencies, what we do need to collaborate with them. I think we can reach out just a little bit further. One of the things that happens is we get inundated with salespeople in Public Works, right? They've got some new thing that's coming out that they want us to try. I think as the RTC, specifically in this realm of the work that we do, both in the construction and could be project management software, could be planning tools, all those sort of things. I think as a region, I think we should come together and draw people in from the various groups to be that test group, if you will, that we test different things. We'd have one group that's more on the planning and engineering side. We'd have one group that's more on the maintenance and operations. But I think there's an opportunity for us to collaborate with them in that way. And the importance of that is to make sure we have the best materials for the region, and that we're also treating our customers with Reno and Sparks, Washoe County, to make sure that the materials and things that we put in are also easier to maintain. So I guess I would just end with that. Where we are today is a great place, and I think the staff has done a fabulous job, and I'd love to be able to continue that with them. I've been successful in the things that I've done. I know what it takes to be successful, and I want to be successful for you.
Great. Great. Thank you, Mr. Flansburgh. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll take a quick break here. We will bring in our next candidate. Our next candidate will be Mr. Abul Hassan. Is it really? February is
Appreciate it.
Does Michael need, here? Just trying to get Commissioner Delgado, making sure you get back in the door. All right, so we are on to our second candidate, Mr. Habul San. Welcome to this morning. We want to thank you first and foremost. We understand how difficult it is to interview in a public forum like this, but we respect you for doing that. And so, right out the gate, we'll get right into it and get started. You have 10 minutes for your opening statement. So, sir, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me, and good morning, everyone. I'd like to do a disclosure first. At this point, over the next 30 or so minutes, every conversation that we have and the opinions that I share are going to be my own, with no affiliation with Keolis, which certainly does business with the RTC, or in relation to any conversations within the RTC. With that said, I am very glad to be here before you to have this discussion about the next executive director. I'd like to begin by telling you a little bit about myself, who I am. So my career started in Maryland, Washington, D.C., and through humble beginnings, I was actually putting myself through college at the University of Maryland and decided that the $10 an hour job as a bus operator was probably very high pay at that time. So I obtained my CDL and put myself through college driving buses. Having done that and having graduated, I moved on to the DMV as a project manager, actually as a statistical analyst for the DMV, doing a lot of state stats to be able to talk about accountability, profitability, and how do we improve customer service for the DMVs in Maryland. That position turned into a project manager, in which I did capital infrastructure implementation for the state of Maryland, twofold specifically. One was the Vehicle Emissions Inspection Program, and that was a statewide implementation, a multi-million-dollar project that I did from cradle to grave, and it still stands today in its second or third iteration. The second major project for the DMV was a queuing system that talked about sort of customer accountability, how to basically better serve the customers and the clientele that visit the various DMV offices, and how to create a pattern from a data set standpoint that says that an individual doesn't have to come in and do 5 different transactions. They can come in, they can be a single individual that can perform multiple transactions at a DMV. At the same time, I realized that a lot of the aspirations that I had from a position standpoint could not be met because I was much too young. And so I decided to do something very different than most people, and I decided to take up a second position full-time at the University of Maryland, the same university that gave me my CDL. And they needed a nighttime manager on duty, essentially a supervisor. So I was doing that at nighttime and on weekends, and I was doing the capital IT project management implementation for the state of Maryland during the daytime. And I did that for roughly about 6 years. 2 full-time jobs, and that was my way of trying to compensate for my experience being so young and having a high level of ambition. Ultimately, all of that culminated together in 2011 when a position opened up for the Director of Transportation, Chief of Transportation for Prince George's County. It's a county of 1 million, 13 metro stations, multiple projects, a large level of coordination with one of the largest transit agencies in the U.S., Washington Metro Transit. And so those experiences culminated, and I applied for the position, and I was successful in being able to get that position. That directorship, I believe I was 28 years old at that point. In that position, I was able to do a lot of things, and this is why I am here before you, because every iteration of the things that I've done from that point on has been with a core philosophy in mind: continuous improvement for a client base that is our constituency, to service individuals with disabilities, to service a population that is often silent but is reliant on the services that we provide. It might be the typology of the road that we design. It might be complete streets as an iteration. It might simply be public transportation because you're a mother, a single mother with 3 jobs, and this is the only means that you have. those things stand out to me. And so for Prince George's County, what I was able to do for my time there is, for the first time in that county's history, services were provided to the southern portion of the county. Previously, it was a commuter-based community in which they had to travel at least an hour and a half to be able to get to Washington, D.C. We realized that we could do something for them by leveraging relationships, varying funding types. We were eligible for 5307 as an urbanized county, but our sister county with a population far less than 200,000 was reliant on 5311 funds. We were able to build a relationship with them, and through that relationship provide services to individuals who were most in need of this. During that same time period in Maryland, I was working with the National Parks and Planning on two separate projects. The Purple Line, which is a $2 billion project currently in its construction phase. At that point, it was 65% design. And we were going from community to community talking about what is transit-oriented development? What is transit-oriented corridors? How do we establish stations, and how do we establish communities surrounding those stations? And all of this is important for the next iteration of what I've done in my life, and I realize 4.5 minutes. Purple Line was obviously one of the hallmarks. We also worked on the National Harbor Casino through MGM, designing it to a standard that was conducive to public transportation. So we were reducing single occupancy vehicle use. My son was born in 2013. And at that point, I realized I wanted to move out west and try something a little different. Jokingly, a position had come up open in Anchorage, Alaska, which is a little further north than I had desired. But they had hired me, and so I convinced my wife that we should move up there. Having done so, within a year of being there, I was promoted by the mayor to oversee the transit agency. Population 300,000. Anchorage is an MPO unto itself. I was a sitting member on the MPO. And we did some fantastic things where the state's population is only 700,000. You have more moose than you have people. The fantastic things that we were able to do with public transportation is it's a oil state. It was in the process and is still undergoing a recession. Budgets were being cut left and right. But during that time period, we were able to be innovative with FTA Region 10 to be able to go out for some competitive grants and leverage those grants to offset the operating costs that we didn't have money for, because obviously the funds were dwindling. In that time period, we were able to actually increase service and change a 30-year paradigm from a hub and spoke model to a grid line basis. And none of this was done on my shoulders alone, because a leader is only as strong as the team that that leader has built behind them. We involved the news media, we involved the public, we involved the varying assembly members to be able to come up with a calculated strategy for how do we save this system, because ultimately, at some point, it turns into a self-defeating prophecy where you're going and saying that we need to cut routes because the ridership isn't there, but the ridership isn't there because you're cutting the routes. So we needed to come up with an innovative strategy to be able to go ahead and redeploy these routes. But the framework wasn't about public transportation. It was about transit-oriented development. It was about economic development surrounding the corridors on which transportation was. And so these were spaghetti strings that gave the city the ability to do zoning in a different light, to do parking reductions in a different light, to be able to do development cycles in a different light. And that was successful. There was an article that came out, I want to say, a month or 2 months ago, in which ridership has now substantially increased to the point where the city of Anchorage is actually increasing its routes upon the baseline that was created under me. I was also the person who brought in the first ever Proterra electric bus to the city of Anchorage through a public and private partnership with Solid Waste Services, utilizing no taxpayer funds to be able to do this, so that we can facilitate this conversation about environment, green solutions, and what it does to our community. While I was in Anchorage, Alaska, my wife jokingly said, we had visited Hawaii, Maui specifically, and she said, oh, it would be nice to live here. So I'd applied for a position for the DMV. It was the head of the DMV on the island of Oahu, and I was awarded that position. In July or August of 2018, I moved to Hawaii, and since then I've been working on policy endeavors for the state legislature at a local ordinance level and at a state level, dealing with mobility as a solution. What do you do with curb space, and how do you deal with the varying modes on a shared space? Also TNCs, overseeing the policy endeavors associated with TNCs, how to regulate them, how to mitigate congestion. And then finances. What do we do in an era where you do have electric vehicles, but they might not be paying the same tax rate because obviously they're not getting fuel? So it was very much legislative and policy-oriented. I was also consulting with Keolis at that point as they were bidding for the contract here in Washoe County. And I had visited here in 2017 for the APTA conference, and I saw what this county was about and what the potential of this location was. So when Keolis made the gesture to offer me the position, I was very much inclined to accept. And so here I am before you working to remedy the issues that we've had with the previous contractor through MB Transportation, making sure that electric buses are and continue to be the most successful they can possibly be, and providing a level of service to the community that is worthy of the people that live here.
Great. That was very, time management was great. There.
Thank you.
We saw, I know you were squeaking it in there right underneath it, but you made it. Good job, Mr. Hassan. All right, so what we'll do is we are entering into obviously the Q&A portion of this. The Q&A, all commissioners will be allowed to ask you questions. You will not be penalized for the time. So with that, we'll start with Mayor Ron Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I actually have two questions. The first one is, when you were in Hawaii, and good job, by the way, on your introduction.
Thank you.
When you were in Hawaii, you were less than a year on that job?
I was less than a year, absolutely. And so this is no secret. My resume is indicative of this. I've moved around a lot. I've taken a lot of risks with my career. I have small children. My children are possibly the same ages as at least two of the board members here, 6 and 4, recently just turned 4. I've taken a lot of risks associated with my career, but I've done so because it was in a process of trying to establish who I am. And that caliber has been represented in varying demographics. Prince George's County, a county that is largely African American. Anchorage, Alaska, the focus is on Alaska Natives. Hawaii, it is very much oriented towards East Asians and individuals who are local to the Pacific Islands. But that, to me, is a testament of success in terms of being able to be versatile and diverse in dealing with the location that I'm at. But yes, roughly less than a year, and only because the position had opened up here at the RTC.
Okay. So, thank you. Is there anything in the RTC's future or happening currently with the RTC that would trigger a conflict of interest for you?
Not that I am aware of. There are no shared positions. The RTC is obviously a separate entity with multiple contracts. Keolis is no different than any of the engineering contracts that would be awarded to any third-party vendor. So no, not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Delgado.
Thank you, Chairman. Great job, Mr. Hassan, on the presentation, and appreciate you applying for the position. My question is similar to what I will ask all of the candidates is a big healthcare background, and with that, I really appreciate the health lens incorporated as part of our overall infrastructure. So with that being said, I'm a firm believer that our built environment has a direct impact on our overall quality of health. How would you use that lens in terms of initiatives or projects that you push forward through the RTC?
I take to heart the comments that were provided by the public earlier, talking about livable communities, talking about the fact that our children and their future, we're the decision makers of all of this, right? The things that we do, the projects that you approve, the thought processes that we have, and the way that we build this city, and that's what public transportation is for me. How you build a city will dictate how well the future of our children and their children becomes. So absolutely, my focus in this position would be on building livable communities. And this might be an odd sort of way of saying this, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you build horizontally. There are possibly no engineering solutions to overcome the congestion issues that we have. States to the west of us have tried that. You know, the 3-lane highway has turned into an 8-lane highway, and then the traffic congestion continues to be the same. It's contributing to additional NOx emissions, 2.5, 10 particles, PM particles. How do we combat that? And maybe the solution is we combat that by talking about what do we value as a community? What do we value as leaders representing varying constituencies? And I would hope what we value is what you're pointing, which is the health of our constituents, the health of our children, and the environment, the built environment that we live in. And so as much as my focus would be on public transportation and road typology and making sure that we can mitigate congestion, so too would there be conversations about maybe we need to go ahead and revisit the way that the layout of our typology, the road typology looks, and build infrastructures that are more conducive to walkability and biking, as the case may be, or other modes that are non-intrusive, as opposed to just this very classic mentality of maybe single occupancy vehicles are the sole way to go. I think there is a balance to be had, and we, I think, are in a position to be able to talk about those balances to come to a conclusion that is equitable for every member of our society, regardless of their socioeconomic demographic.
Great. Commissioner Hartung.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hassan. I appreciate everything that you've said thus far. Given the growing needs of the region and the shrinking fuel tax, the index fuel tax, how will you approach and lead the organization to secure additional funding and understanding the need for additional transit? I mean, you've mentioned transit a number of times. We have no transit in Spanish Springs. We have no transit in the far north valleys. We have no transit out in Verdi. We have over in southwest Reno, in the deep southwest, there's no transit there. The far south Reno down into Pleasant Valley, there's no transit there. How will you approach those needs?
You know, when I looked into the RTC, I thought one of the things that I found very interesting is that unlike a lot of agencies, it actually has chosen strategically not to chase the sprawl from a development cycle standpoint. There are advantages to that, obviously, if you have a very finite and limited source of funding, as you're indicating, which a lot of locations do, then it behooves you to stay in a very concentrated area, as the RTC has chosen to do, especially if there is an indication that the technology will advance and mechanisms for transportation will advance through disruptive means or otherwise. But that is not to say there's another thing that's happening, and I think we're all cognizant of it to a certain degree. The very people who work in the city centers can't afford to live in those centers in a lot of locations. And so what ends up happening is that these development cycles continuously push these individuals out to the edges of our communities, and then somehow we're expecting them to spend 5 times or 10 times the cost to be able to come back to the very location where their jobs are. So you're absolutely right. There is a transportation need. Now, is the solution a 40-foot bus going out there? Possibly. I think there are unique situations and there are right fits for right locations. My job in this would be, again, to be an instrument of the board, to have these difficult conversations, not often in a public setting, but perhaps one-on-one, to be able to explain that these are the constraints. You certainly see the budget side of it. You certainly see the demographic side of it. But there is an equitability to be had with the finite resources that we're all sharing. And so the question ultimately becomes, where do you get the most bang for your buck? And which community do we go and facilitate that solution in? And then are there other solutions to be had? Because the pie is only so small. You can't spread it all across the board, because if you do that, you go back to these systems that I've worked in, where you have an hour service from a bus standpoint. Well, that hour is actually 2 hours. That's 2 hours each way. And the conversation that I was having up north was, what kind of a life do you have when you're taking 4 hours to be able to get to and back from work, and you're working an 8 to 10 hour job on any given day? So those are some of the solutions that I'd like to sit down and facilitate. There is a right-sized solution for certain communities, and that might very well entail a 40 or a 60-foot bus. But it doesn't happen magically on its own. I mean, there are no organics to this. Part of what I had to do in Anchorage, Alaska was go out and meet businesses. We had a corridor it was called Spanard, that went directly from the airport to the downtown business area, but we never ran buses there. Well, I changed that to 15-minute frequencies, not because the ridership was there, but because the businesses were there. All the hotels were lined up. And then we actually had to go and roll our sleeves up and go to those businesses and say, listen, I see that you've got a shuttle or two that you're running straight to the airport, but all 10 of you are doing this. And what can we do? Can we have some sort of an equitable conversation, a public-private partnership in which you can fund public transportation and we can stop on your front door? And if we can do that, then maybe what we can do is leverage the federal funds that we get and are curators of, the taxpayer funds that we get and are curators of, and we can invest that on your front curb, not on your property, but on the front curb. And that gives you as a business an, in essence, an ability to go ahead and transform your business, and it gives us the ability to go ahead and take some of your ridership away from you. And it's a win-win solution. So those partnerships must be had. The last part of your question related to funding was policy-oriented, and I would say one of the things that I do bring to the table is, having worked on a policy standpoint, yes, absolutely, the gas tax is diminishing. We need an alternative solution. Some of the solutions that I was working on from a policy standpoint was, how do we go ahead and take the yearly inspections that are done on vehicles and change that to a mileage-based concept, so that through state policy and the state legislature, the funding source changes away from taxes for gas to taxes associated with miles driven on a yearly basis. That way, it is equitable based on how often you drive. And that was a concept that was being explored, because we realized that as time progresses, vehicles, especially SUVs, are moving away from gases, utilizing fossil fuel, to going fully electric. And so this was one type of a solution that could be out there. But ultimately, in a nutshell, the solution for long-term funding availability is, you have to have more people at the table. You have to have a common core conversation, and you have to be able to bring in private businesses, nonprofit organizations, and have legislative and federal policy changes to be able to support this endeavor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Madam Vice Chair.
I'll eventually get this down. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Always a pleasure to have you
Absolutely.
before us. And thank you, or welcome to our community. You're somewhat of a newcomer.
Yes.
One of the things we did as part of this process is we solicited input from the community at large, to ask them what they wanted to see in the next executive director. And just like the job description is very diverse,
Yes.
very broad, so were the responses in which we received into what people wanted to see. But there were some commonalities and some themes within it. What I would like to ask you is if you could give an example of when you have led the effort, emphasis on led the effort, not just been a part of it, to bring together diverse individuals, entities, jurisdictions, and federal representatives and funding to bring a project to fruition, being specific in who those were.
Absolutely. Again, I'll mention the last transit agency that I oversaw, because it had a lot of issues. I mentioned that it was an oil-based economy and that they were in a state of recession and continue to be. With limited funding sources and often in competition with EMS and fire and police, transportation was always at the bottom of those three. So we had to be innovative, and that innovation was, I mentioned one iteration of it, bringing businesses to the fold to talk about equitability in funding distribution and associated service related to their clientele. The other part of it was, we got a little desperate. I reached out to Federal Region 10, FTA, and we began conversations about the fact that I was very keenly aware that if the tax base continued to be reduced in terms of funding sources for the agency, then at some point the FTA would step in and say, well, you know, we had an expectation, we gave you this amount of capital funding, and you're not meeting those expectations because you continue to reduce service. And if you do that, then you owe us some of our funds back. And that's a trigger that I did not want to happen. So the conversation with the FTA was, how can we utilize the federal assets, capital, that we have? In this case, it was infrastructure, to talk about, well, can we lease some portion of it for better use, to be able to take the revenue associated with the leasing of those properties and divert it back into the fold to do operating cost or leveraging it towards additional capital grants on either an 80-20 match or a 90-10 match. So those conversations were being had with the FTA. We were certainly going after unique grants. I mentioned electric buses, and NOLO was certainly one of them. 5339 from a capital infrastructure implementation standpoint was another one of them. We reached out to the legislature, and we had a owner of a shopping center, and we worked with Lisa Murkowski to go ahead and allocate certain amounts of funding for that shopping center. But what ended up happening after the allocation at a federal level was that obviously the owner of the private property couldn't use it. So we became the mechanism and a medium to go ahead and take that funding, allocate it to the agency, and redivert it to do a transit center on that mall property. It was, again, a demonstration of public-private partnership in which we had a mall owner who leased us land for $1 over a 10-year period, and we actually not only improved their property, but in addition to that, we also brought in public transportation. This was a tiered approach to be able to go ahead and have a transit center, buses coming to that transit center, and then trying to build rail on top of that if we could do that in a 20-year horizon. Finally, what I'll mention is, in my experience, universities have been a center of economic development and diversity. Many successful cities are only successful because of the empowerment that they've given to their universities and developing those campuses. I was in Washington, D.C. just a few days ago. I sit on the panel for the National Academies of Sciences at the TRB, and I'm a panelist giving guidance to local governments about what to do in relation to mobility as a service, disruptive technology, and full automation, SAE Level 5, and how to sort of, from a policy endeavor standpoint, how to take care of those things. The reason that I'm mentioning that is because, again, one of the things that I did in Anchorage, Alaska, was have a conversation with the university. And the conversation was, why are we running redundant systems? Why are you running your own transportation system within your campus when you have a flagship transportation system right outside of your campus? And what will it take for us to sit down and have this conversation of equity in which maybe I save you some money and we bring some of that money back to the taxpayer base? So hopefully that gives you a few examples. I do have a few more, but unfortunately I don't have the time. Thank you. You're welcome.
Mr. Hassan, thank you. We appreciate your coming this morning. My questions to you are, as it pertains to policy issues, you've mentioned in your opening statements and throughout your comments the times that you've spent in not only Washington, D.C., but here and in many jurisdictions working with the state and municipalities and also the federal government. With the challenges that lie ahead for RTC, many of our funding options come from federal grants. Many of the challenges that we have as it pertains to policy issues, as it pertains to labor, prevailing wage, as for projects. State challenges are CMAQ funds and policy changes as it pertains to how we operate and work with NDOT. How would you, in your experience, be able to bring a level of understanding to the executive director role and provide that direction for the RTC?
I would say, having sat in on at least the last 6 board meetings, you've done as a group a fantastic job of asking the questions that you're supposed to. Follow the money. Where does it come from? What is the diversity of the tax base? How is that going to NDOT? How is that pie being sliced up? Which portion of that pie is going to Southern Nevada? How much of the contribution of our good citizens in Washoe County is being rediverted to the assets in the field of play? You've done all of those things. And I would say that the job of the executive director is to continue to facilitate those conversations with you through the resources available to the executive director within the RTC. It is to demonstrate that these are the funding strings and this is where they're going. And then maybe get to a point where we have an equitable conversation about maybe it is a little bit too much for certain agencies to be able to take on the responsibility that they've taken on. Maybe we can't wait 30 years for the spaghetti bowl to get completed. Maybe what we need to do at times is step up to the challenge and take on the responsibility ourselves if we're able to, if we are able to. And that is a conversation and a decision that you as a group must make. But I would like to be an enabler, to have this conversation with you, to give you the tools and to give you the varying paradigms that exist to be able to make this the most successful possible. But what I would do is, again, utilize the knowledge base at my disposal, utilize what I have learned in other locations. And again, this place is not unique. I mean, even in Anchorage, Alaska, the right-of-way was owned by the State Department of Transportation, within city limits, no less. And yet we, as the city, were having conversations about, well, why can't we do snow clearance on time? Or why can't we do the rehabilitation project that we need on this specific corridor? Well, we couldn't do it because we didn't own the right-of-way. But the state refused to do it, even though they owned the right-of-way. Those conversations need to happen on the back end. And for me, it's a matter of transparency. And then it's a matter of what are our next steps? Do we need to do this ourselves? And I will say, someone very wise made a comment that stuck with me and said, our county must continually strive for increased efficiency and forward planning. And I take that to heart.
Thank you, Mr. Hassan. All right, so with that, I will allow you 5 minutes to proceed with your closing comments, sir.
Thank you. Well, first and foremost, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. My resume is very different than the candidates that you have before you. They have a far longer career stretch than I do. I am in my late 30s despite my gray hair. And so when we talk about risk and the fact that I've been in certain locations for a brief period, it is very much a reflection of my age, but hopefully not my experience. One thing that I would like to tell you is that I was thinking about the position, and I was thinking about what made Lee successful for the last 10 years, and why it wasn't working the way it should have been prior to that time frame. And I think one of the contributing factors that are seldom mentioned is the fact that he was very skilled at hiring the right people around him. Because you as a leader are only as good as the team that you've created around you, the support network that you have around you. And so I'm happy to say that of all the places that I've been, I am very much impressed by the talent pool that we have at the RTC. And that starts with every position that's in there, the risks that they take, the calculated risks that they take, and the level of sophistication that they have within the agency. And so first and foremost, my priority would be to continue to encourage that talent. Because as a leader, as I stand before you, I'm not trying to be an expert on engineering. I'm not trying to be an expert on transportation or how to appropriately apply for the varying grants that are out there between the FHWA and the FTA. I can certainly do a lot of that. I'm certainly a jack of all trades. But I believe the leadership position is to facilitate the abilities of the people that work with you to make them the best that they can possibly be. And whether it's me or whether it's someone else, I would hope that that continues to be. And so with that said, let's think about the last 10 years and all the successful things that we've done from a grant standpoint, right? The Virginia Corridor as a primary example. The lead person for that was Amy, a very qualified individual and very much a gem for the RTC. And so I would hope that we can reflect on the fact that it is the talent pool at the RTC that has made the leadership the best it can possibly be. The other thing that I would like to add is I have a very simple philosophy for doing what I've done. The reason that I've been able to do it is because I wasn't always in a suit. I remind people that being poor isn't a crime. I am the son of an immigrant who came here when he was 9 years old to the US. I spoke no English at all, and this was in New York. I used to take the subway to be able to get to school, to be able to get to where my father had his businesses in Queens. And growing up, it's been a struggle. You don't forget those things. And the reason that I mention that is because our community is a silent majority. I often come up in assembly meetings in my other positions and feel obligated to go ahead and speak on behalf of individuals with disabilities, our seniors, our individuals who have no cars, and talk about the things that might make their lives more conducive from the standpoint of resources, so that transportation and what we do as an agency, whether it's the MPO side, whether it's the engineering design side, or whether it's the transportation side, that we can uplift them from poverty. For me, that is the fundamental goal that has driven my career. Every step that I take, every decision that I've taken, every career path that I've been in has been with the sole focus of making sure that we take those who are the least fortunate and put them in a better position when we are done. And that is what I hope to do before this board, as an instrument of this board, as we continue to make this county the most successful that it can be. The challenges are immense. Population continues to increase. There is an influx from the west. You have engineering challenges with the typology and topography of your roads. You have transportation challenges and connectivity challenges in your communities. But I think together we can do this. I think together we're stronger for it. But most of all, we should never forget who we're doing this with, because it boils down to who are we, what do we stand for, and what do we want to leave as our legacies for our children and their children after us. I thank you so much for your time.
Mr. Hassan, thank you so much. We appreciate it. You're more than welcome to stay in the chambers for the remainder of the interviews.
Thank you.
So next candidate we will be inviting down is Miss Amy Cummings, please. We'll take a, yeah, we're on track. Take a brief break here for a second. Oh, yeah.
We have a commissioner that's still on a smidge of a break.
So we'll let you get set up, Amy, and we'll get right into it just here.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay. Now that we're all back, we'll jump right back into this so we can we're going to try to stay on track and be efficient today as much as possible. So Ms. Cummings, you're well versed in the process. I won't go through it again for you. So with that, I will open the floor for you. Your 10 minutes for your opening statements.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Amy Cummings with RTC, as you know. It has been a great honor to serve as your interim executive director. And it's been wonderful to have the opportunity to work more closely with each of you. I feel like we've had some really good accomplishments over the last couple of months. Of course, it started my first week stepping in with communicating with you about our evacuation of the Villanova Maintenance Facility due to a hazardous materials spill, and working through that. Was able to lead our workshop on transit and pedestrian safety to start our budget process. Of course, working with Chairman Lucy on preparing our agendas, which I think has gone very well. And of course, we've had many successful outreach events during this time for Audie Wells, for Virginia Street, kicking off our interagency consultation for Lemon Drive. And I had the opportunity to speak with the interim legislative committee for the state about long-term funding needs for transportation. So we've kept things on track and moving forward. And throughout, I've worked to keep you informed and to get your input as we go. You're familiar with my background. I feel that my experience makes me uniquely qualified for this position. I have been with the RTC for over 9 years. I'm very familiar with our financial and legal capacity and our projects and services that we offer. I would be able to step in and do the job on day one. As a metropolitan planning organization and the transit agency and the regional road builder, we are a unique organization, and I have experience in all of those aspects of the RTC. As you know, I became the Deputy Executive Director in 2018, and since that time, I've been involved in all aspects of our budgeting, administrative services, and our project and project delivery and planning. I became our Planning Director in 2010, and since that time, I've made it a priority to really focus on our relationships with our partner agencies, to strengthen those with the jurisdictions, the surrounding counties, as well as our private sector partners with EDON and the Chamber as just a couple of examples. We've made community outreach a significant priority and a component of everything that we do. Under my leadership, we have received awards for our sustainability plan, our Complete Streets Master Plan, and I'm particularly proud of the USDOT award for the Fourth Prater Project and our Regional Transportation Plan. And we just recently had our MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization Certification Review by FHWA and FTA. And we received 8 commendations for the excellence of our planning projects, integrating our planning and project delivery, and for our community outreach. We have been recognized as well by the Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations for our excellence in planning at the national level. I led the efforts to obtain over $60 million in competitive discretionary grant funds. That includes the 4th Street Prater Way, Virginia Street, and the Sutro Complete Street projects. Was instrumental in developing the Shared Work Program with Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Agency, as well as our Vision Zero Coalition, which is focusing on pedestrian safety. I'm a past president and board member of the Truckee Meadows Tomorrow Group that tracks quality of life indicators, and I've also been elected to the board of the Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations. Before joining RTC, I was in the private sector for 9 years with the planning and engineering firm Parsons Brinkerhoff, and there I was most recently the Nevada planning manager, but when I started, I was focusing on GIS, technical planning, and environmental analysis. I had the opportunity to work on many major projects across the country, I-69, major transit projects in light rail in Houston and Memphis, as well as multiple projects for RTC of Southern Nevada, including 3 of their BRT corridors, the Downtown Connector, Flamingo Road, and Boulder Highway. My first job out of graduate school was with the Metro Nashville-Davidson County Planning Department, and there I worked on long-range land use planning, sub-area plans, corridor plans, and probably the most interesting as the special projects planner was the redistricting of their roughly 30 council districts after the 2000 census. I have an undergraduate degree from Florida State University, a master's degree in community planning from University of Maryland College Park, and a Master of Arts in History from the University of Nevada, Reno, where I focused on transportation history, and in particular, transportation history of our transit system here in Reno and Sparks. In terms of my capabilities, my background, as I mentioned, is in GIS, environmental and technical planning for transportation. The successes that I've had in those areas, I think, are largely because I'm able to work effectively with diverse stakeholders. That's been a collaborative approach that's really been the hallmark of everything I've done here at RTC. We're out with the community early and often to make sure we have a continuous engagement process and that we incorporate that input into our designs. On the technical side, again, I'm very familiar with the regulatory framework within which we work, the FAST Act, state provisions, and in terms of the Metropolitan Planning Organization, the requirements for a performance-based planning program, and of course, all the required documents, the Regional Transportation Plan, Unified Planning Work Program, and Regional Transportation Improvement Program. I think my knowledge of these areas and our ability to put successful practices in place is reflected again by those commendations we've received from USDOT as part of our certification review. I'm also knowledgeable about the FTA process. We've worked very closely with our partners at Region 9 and DOT headquarters for our BRT projects on Virginia and 4th and Prater over the last several years. And of course, I'm understanding of our roadway program and the various elements of that, pavement preservation, ITS, signal timings, and our multimodal improvements. I'm able to lead the organization as we enter a period of change and potential disruption. We are going to be seeing changes brought about by autonomous vehicles, connected vehicles, electrification of our transportation system, as well as the growth of our community. We're expecting to add 100,000 residents over the next 20 years, and we need to make sure our transportation infrastructure is prepared for that. I bring a creative and collaborative approach to problem solving. And of course, I understand the basics of planning for accessibility, planning for safety, and providing those multimodal connections and new corridors that connect our community. In terms of why I want to serve as your executive director, I have a great love for RTC as an organization, for our mission, and for the staff. We have just such an extremely talented and dedicated staff at RTC. And I have really been inspired over the last couple of months by the number of people who've come up to me on staff and wished me well and given me their encouragement, and that has just meant the world to me. And I think I speak for all of us at RTC, we are excited for the work that we do and the mission ahead. We have the ability to serve the needs of our growing region, to improve safety. We can save lives, we can improve connections, provide accessibility, and meet the needs of our changing region. And we have a track record of doing this on 4th Prater and Virginia Street, and we want to continue that with the many exciting projects ahead. So I'm looking forward to the opportunity to continue to work with each of you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cummings. So we will jump right into the question and answer. Obviously, we have explained that. You will have 15 minutes to answer the questions. You won't be penalized for any time from the commissioner's questions. So with that, we'll start right off with Mayor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great presentation, Amy. Appreciate that, all the work you've done, the hard work that you put in. My question is there anything in the RTC's future or happening currently with the RTC that would trigger a conflict of interest for you?
No.
Any projects coming up that?
No, I would not anticipate any type of conflict of interest.
Okay, simple question.
Thank you, Mayor. Commissioner Delgado.
Thank you, Chairman. Great job, Amy. I've asked all the candidates, I'll ask all the candidates the same question. I have a strong healthcare background, and with that background, I tend to look at things through the healthcare lens. With the built environment, we know the impacts it has on overall health. How would you use that lens in terms of pushing initiatives, projects forward with our growing community?
Thank you for that question. We've been working with the Washoe County Health District for the 9 years that I've been here to integrate the community outreach and the messaging of transportation infrastructure and the benefits to public health. One of our guiding principles is to promote safe and healthy communities. So we do recognize that those are directly connected. And there's a couple of ways. One is through the infrastructure we can provide for active transportation. And that includes accessible sidewalks so that people can walk to a bus stop, bicycle facilities so that people can be out and active as part of their daily routine, and that has a number of cardiovascular and respiratory health benefits. So that's definitely reflected both in our policies and in a lot of our major initiatives. In all of our, even our roadway capacity projects, we're integrating those multimodal options so that it's safer, and people have as examples on Pyramid Highway, it's a capacity project with safety improvements, but it's also going to include a multi-use path. Audie Wells is another with sidewalks and a multi-use path to improve safety. And of course, another aspect of public health is safety and reducing the number of crashes that we experience on our roadways. And that, as you're aware, we have a tremendous focus right now in partnership with the jurisdictions and INDOT on school zone safety. We're going to be increasing our funding as we approach our budget cycle for our intersection improvements so that we can focus more on those school zones on regional roads. And the Spaghetti Bowl is another example of a project that we're contributing towards funding of a project that, again, it's the highest crash location in the region. And all of those definitely have a tie back to public health.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Harton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nice presentation, Amy. Well done. You're quite aware of this. Given the growing needs of the region and the shrinking indexed fuel tax, how will you approach and lead the organization to secure additional funding sources and then prioritize those throughout the region so that it is sort of a balanced level of growth in transportation and transit?
Thank you. We do have the update underway right now for the Regional Transportation Plan, and we'll be using a performance-based process for prioritizing those projects. We're looking at crashes by corridor, we're looking at traffic congestion, we're looking at pavement conditions. So we have the metrics that we'll be able to share with the board to make those decisions on what the priorities are. And we try to maximize our fuel tax dollars. We do have more fuel tax than sales tax, as you know. Where we can, like Fourth Prater in Virginia, we leverage our sales tax dollars, our fuel tax dollars to support our transit system. So that includes accessible sidewalks so people can get to transit. It includes, an example is our bus stop improvement program. So we're focusing our sidewalk improvements near bus stops so that we can maximize that. We are also part of the interim legislative committee. It's called the SCR3, and it's looking at exactly the issue that you mentioned. As electrification increases, electric vehicles today don't pay impact fees, or they don't pay user fees for the roadway system. They're not paying any fuel tax at all. So this concept that the legislature is going to be looking at in the next session is going to be, are there options for some sort of fee for electric vehicles that would rise as we project the fuel tax to decrease over time as that balance shifts with more electric vehicles in the fleet compared to cars, paying for fuel. So I think we're going to be active in the national level as well with reauthorization coming up, working with our delegation on is there an appetite to increase the federal fuel tax or look at a VMT, vehicle miles of travel fee at the national level. So we'll be participating in that as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Harton. Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you. This mic is giving me.
It's not this one.
It's this one? I think you might be right. I think I'm trying to push it too hard. Thank you, Amy. Thank you for all of your efforts and for being here. I know you work so hard at the RTC, and I value you very, very much. And my question is, and you know this, when the information went out on the position, the qualifications and the desires of attributes was very, very diverse. And the likelihood of finding anyone that has all of those in expert form is probably an impossibility. So knowing that, I'm going to ask you a question, and I would like you to be specific in your responses by name and by entity. Could you please provide an example of a time when you led, not just were a part of, led the charge in bringing diverse individuals, entities, jurisdictions, and politicians together and acquired funding to bring a project to fruition. And if you need me to repeat that, I will be happy to.
I think there are a couple of examples. And I'm going to start with the 4th Street Prater Way corridor. That was one of the first projects I was involved with at RTC. It started through our UPWP program. And we went to the jurisdictions, and I was, as you know, the new planning director, went to the jurisdictions through our technical advisory committee and said, what corridor is important to you for us to focus on? And what we heard from all of the jurisdictions was 4th Street Prater Way as our top priority. So I put that in our plan. We started a corridor study, and it helped facilitate that process. We made sure that we were working with businesses, residents, and this was a great project because it tied downtown Reno to downtown Sparks. So we had both of those jurisdictions involved. We worked, again, it's a very diverse corridor, so we were reaching out to our transit customers as well as the longtime residents. We did the oral history project, you may remember, where we interviewed a lot of those business owners and residents to capture those stories and make that information available to the public through our station designs. We brought those entities together through the planning process that continued in the environmental phase. And then I was the lead writer for, we actually submitted 3 times for our Tiger Grant. And each phase we were continuing, you know, first was during planning, then environmental, but once we had our environmental document done, we were successful with getting the $16 million Tiger Grant application from the Federal Transit Administration. So over those 3 years, we were continuously working with our colleagues at FTA, making sure the DOT understood our project, making sure all of our local partners were on board. We had a united front throughout the community in support of the 4th Street Prater Way project. We had letter supports from the Health District, from the jurisdictions, from NDOT, from many of the stakeholders and businesses, and that was successful. There was still a little bit of a funding gap, so we proceeded on to the Small Starts grant application with the Federal Transit Administration and got the remaining about $6.4 million that we needed to complete that funding package. And we're able to deliver that. And now it's been open for a year. It's performing great. We've connected the downtowns with a high-frequency route, great transit stops, full ADA accessibility, and it's really accomplished what we set out to achieve back when we started in 2011. Thank you.
Great. Ms. Cummings, thank you again for participating in this process. We appreciate you being here. You've served at the RTC for many years and have been doing that in a fashion above most. And so my questions as it pertains to RTC, as you've pointed out, we serve as an MPO for the region, the Mass Transit Authority. We are very intimately involved in a lot of road construction and construction throughout the region. But when you talk about that construction, most of the challenges that we have come from either the federal government and the state. And you have an immense amount of experience, as you've pointed out, through the grant applications and what we've had to endure. I've worked with you over the last 5 years on a number of those issues, working with the DOT, the FTA, and FHWA. How do you, as the new face of the organization, how would you deal with developing relationships with both the federal government and the state and addressing policy needs that will impact the Washoe RTC for years to come?
Thank you for that question. I think we have a very exciting opportunity right now because of the governor's priority for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And now NDOT is speaking more openly and forcefully about supporting transit. So as part of this interim legislative committee, one of the topics that's coming up is, one, how do we offset the loss in fuel tax because of electric vehicles? But two, that doesn't help our transit needs statewide for the urban areas, including RTC Washoe, RTC Southern Nevada, and the rural needs that NDOT is trying to fund. So we're having a different conversation at the statewide level that I think we've had previously, and we've had more vocal support from NDOT than we've ever had, and I'm very excited about that. I think that's going to open some doors for some new thinking and new collaborations. We're in the early phases of that, but I think the upcoming legislative session is going to be very interesting, and we definitely want to be engaged there. And in terms of at the federal level, we are continuing to engage with our delegation. We do visits as needed for projects. In particular, as we were getting the Virginia Street grant up and ready and executed. The Shared Federal Framework is on the horizon, and we are going to be continuing with that effort to share the RTC's priorities with our delegation and others at the Capitol, both on the staff and elected levels. We have a great federal team in John Porter and Anya Graves who are providing support for us in this and all of our outreach with our delegation and keeping us up to date on the latest federal policy issues. And we continue to reach out, our partners at INDOT, at FHWA, at the Region 9 of FTA are absolutely with us. We meet monthly with our FTA colleagues, at least on the phone, if not in person. And we're continuing to reach out to the DOT on our grant applications. The Pyramid Highway Grant is another example. We're going to be resubmitting that for the BUILD program this year. We had a debrief with DOT a few weeks ago, got some really good feedback, so we're going to update our grant submittal and send that in again and continue to get the support from our delegation for those grant applications and build those relationships with the staff in DC.
Great, thank you. So, Ms. Cummings, you have about 6 minutes left. Are there any follow-up questions? Commissioner Hartung.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Amy, you mentioned transit in the region and also some potential multimodal opportunities. But how will you address transit and multimodal opportunities with the needs of places like Spanish Springs, where nearly 1/3 of Sparks has no transit whatsoever? That's not to mention all of the unincorporated area that's north of that. Places like the North Valleys, Verdi, and even Southwest Reno. How will you approach that so that we can reduce vehicle miles traveled and give people another option for transit and not having to drive their vehicles?
We have the opportunity to do that today in a way that we haven't over the last at least 9 years since I've been here because of the growth in our sales tax revenues. We've been able to replenish those reserves, and now it will be an item on the board agenda next week to move forward with a service change that would do a microtransit demonstration in the North Valleys as well as Spanish Springs. And as you know, these are places, especially Spanish Springs, that have never had transit service before. And we found out in the Sparks microtransit demonstration that once we provided that, and we have a zone where you can call a ride and it will come pick you up at, in the front of your building, you don't have to walk that half mile to a bus stop. We're having customers reach out and take advantage of that who've never ridden before. So areas that never had service are now some of our largest, destination and call points for our microtransit on Vista. And we're very excited about that. I think it reflects there's just a huge unmet demand for mobility services, particularly among our seniors. And now we have an opportunity to, and it is incremental, it's a new zone in Spanish Springs and the North Valleys. There's certainly many more. We are as well as looking at Somerset and Verdi. We have in our long-range vision extending the Rapid down to the Summit Mall on South Virginia. That one we'll need to work together to put a funding package together for that. That is not funded at this time. I think that's a challenge for us to move forward. And it's projects like that that can be transformative in combination with the microtransit to make transit more accessible for more of our residents, because we clearly know there's a growing demand.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Amy, I have one follow-up question for you. As the executive director, you would be the intermediary between this board, policymakers, the general public, and the staff that you oversee. How, as the executive director, would you change and nurture the culture within the RTC in a positive manner and help provide for new innovations?
I think we do have a great culture at the RTC. I think my predecessor really set the bar high in terms of a collaborative workspace, and what I want to do is continue that and to continue to build on the work we're doing for promoting a respectful workplace, the diversity training that we've started. We want to make sure that that continues. the professional development of staff, so we're providing those training opportunities, making sure people have the resources they need at the technical level to do the work that needs to be done. So I think that's one aspect. Our public outreach component is really the centerpiece of everything that we do. So in terms of communicating with the public, you're going to continue to see that. We did have our budget, sort of director level budget workshop earlier this week, and we're talking about ways, can we expand that? What can we do to really grow the reach and our capabilities for outreach so that we're doing more videos, we're doing more multimedia, we have more graphic capabilities and staff resources to provide those tools to the public that make it easy for them to understand what we're doing. And those make it easy for us to explain the options that we bring towards you as board members. Obviously, you are the decision makers. Our mission is to implement the direction that you provide, and it's our job to give you the information and the data and the resources to be able to make those decisions. So I look forward to RTC continuing to be a very public-facing organization. We're a member of this community, and really everything intersects with transportation in one way or another. We talked about public health and safety, economic development. So much of what we do is interconnected with transportation, and I want RTC to continue to be a community partner in all of those areas.
Great. All right. Any further follow-ups? Seeing no further follow-ups? Okay. She's just testing her mic. We're having some AV issues today. We'll allow you your 5 minutes for your 5-minute closing.
Thank you. I do want to express how grateful I am to be among this great group of candidates who has the opportunity to interview with you. And I'm really excited for what is in store for RTC. I want to continue to lead RTC as we do embark on this period of change, to implement the many important and needed projects that are on the horizon. We have a lot that's in our plan right now. We're updating that plan, so we're going to be fine-tuning that and tailoring it to meet the needs as they change. And we talked about one of them, transit service to Spanish Springs and the North Valleys in ways that we have never been able to provide before. I'm really excited to be able to be a part of that. Of course, the rapid extension to UNR, expansion of our alternative fueled fleets, so that's our electric vehicles and other technologies, to keep our transit system at the cutting edge and operating at the most cost-effective way possible. Continuing our community outreach for pedestrian safety, particularly school zone safety. We're also doing a lot of training for members of the community on how to ride our transit system, because we find there are a lot of folks who they would ride if they knew how and had more information. We're expanding our ITS and technology capabilities. We're looking for new ways, and this is another item for our agenda next week, that public transit can help combat human trafficking in our region, because we know that our transit stops can be a nexus for that. So we want to do training and be proactive in that regard. And then there are the projects that you're all familiar with, sidewalks on Sun Valley Boulevard, cycle track on Center Street and Audie Wells, more capacity and multimodal and safety improvements on Sparks Boulevard and Pyramid Highway. These are transformative projects that I'm very excited about. I know all of the RTC staff is very passionate about delivering, and we want to do this in partnership with the community so that these are really going to make improvements in the quality of life for our residents for the better. I feel that my knowledge and experience with the organization, the regulatory framework that we operate within, and our programs and services is really going to position me well to implement the vision of the board as we move forward. And again, I look forward to continuing to work with you, again, in whatever capacity. I know that RTC is going to continue to do great things, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk with you today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Amy. We really appreciate it. So with that, what we'll do, we will invite now Mr. Carl Hasty. So we'll take a brief break to get Mr. Hasty into the room, and then we will jump back into it. I know, but I look 56. say, you can go do it in a day. Mr. Hasty, how are you? We're gonna, we have two commissioners. As soon as they get back into the room, we'll jump right into it, okay?
You bet.
Give you a couple seconds to get Pratt.
No problem.
Welcome, Mr. Hasty. We appreciate you. Thank you for entertaining our break there for a second.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
This is a kind of endurance morning for us. So, to get right into this so we can continue to be efficient with our time, Mr. Hasty, the floor is yours, and you have your 10 minutes, sir.
I appreciate that. Of the 5 candidates you have before you, I'm the one who's not presently working in the Valley. So you're probably wondering, what's the interest here and what do I know about things down here? So I'd like to start off with that and kind of explain that I'm a long-term resident here in Washoe County. I have been here and remember the days of when the Helms Pit was filled in and the MGM was built, and what a transformational change that made to the area with moving gaming outside of the casino core, and what that meant then when we were watching our housing at that point in time, and have watched the progression over the years since. I've interacted quite a bit with RTC over the years in my tenure at Tahoe, from being the deputy there and addressing our MPO, our fledgling MPO authority at Tahoe back in the early 2000s. I watched with admiration of what this community did in 2008 with the leadership of RTC and putting on the ballot the 2 initiatives there for both transit and projects at the time of the Great Recession. I voted for both of those. I've been envious of what Washoe County did with that and what the voters supported and what that's meant for the Valley down here and being able to respond to the types of transformational changes going on as we've recovered from that economic downturn. And what we're seeing continue in terms of growth of jobs to the east, what it's meant in terms of development for the North Valleys, down at the south end of the foothills. I'm also fully aware of the commute patterns that go on. I am a commuter myself, and living in South Reno and commuting to Lake Tahoe. And so I've been very admiring of RTC also as an organization. My interest in the job then is because this is my home. I like the kinds of challenge that you have here with the growth because it's the kind of challenge that I've been dealing with at Tahoe. We experience that growth in a different way, in that we're the backyard for many of the residents here as well as from the California side. Our visitation is heavy. The interregional aspects of our relationship are intertwined both economically, it's the marketing for this area, and it's a big asset for the area. So understanding here and the organization that RTC has been, it's a good organization. I know many of the people that work in it. They have a rich history, and I would like to be part of it. So that's really my interest in the job. My knowledge and experience, what I have done at Tahoe with what we need to deal with when it comes to our local level, our business sector, our federal partners, our state DOTs and so on, I have a lot of experience there given the fact that our complexities may be a little bit more than down here. RTC and my district, which is a special bi-state district that has a board of 11. We have 6 local governments, 3 private sector slots, and the 2 state DOTs as ex officio. We will soon be going to a board of 14 because now are going to be added to that 2 governor appointees, 1 from each state, as well as another state appointment off of the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency in order to address what we need to do at Tahoe. So while our organizations were both created at the same period of time, there was in 2 different pieces of legislation. But in those days, to me, is with the legislature's recognizing that the complexity of transportation and the full focus that it is required to get it on the ground needs an entity like the commission and an entity like the district at Tahoe. Since we're not in Tahoe in 1 full county, but portions of 5 with 1 municipality, we don't exactly fit the same way that the commission has been able to do its business. But the partnerships that are required are even more intense because we have so many, given the fact that it's 2 states, 6 local governments, at least more than 30 special districts up there in the private sector and the residents. For us, nothing is easy up there. I don't think it's any particularly easier down here. But if you don't have the relationships to put that together, then you're not going to get anywhere. Examples of that are, I'll give you quickly, our US 50 project, which is looking to realign 1.1 mile section of US 50 around the South Shore Commercial Core, which we have approval now. 40 years on the books. We got an approval through TRPA with a 14-0 vote. That took a lot to get that 14-0 vote. The SR 28 corridor, and if you are enjoying that new bike trail segment that's between Incline Village and Sand Harbor, that was our project. NDOT built that project. In order to get that project on the ground, we had to get agreement with 13 agencies who have some management responsibility in that corridor. That was the single biggest impediment. Once we got that impediment done with, money was much easier to acquire, and getting to the construction of the project was much easier to be done. So my knowledge of how to work this and being able to deliver these complex projects in a complex political environment is illustrated in the success we've had, including at Tahoe City with another project there. My experience is with my organization is bringing one of understanding with our partners, what's going to win for them, how are they rewarded, what's a win-win in a situation. That's how we've had to do our business because there's no such thing really as a unilateral solution. And it really requires a number of entities to come together to make things happen. That's the only way we can get it done at the lake. And if you figure out how to do that, you can get these very difficult things done, which is what we've been doing and I've been doing since I've been in my tenure at the district. Proactive, some humility. Those are the other elements that I teach my staff, that we have to approach what we do because we're into each and every community and our aim is to provide value to that community in what we're doing with our services and with our projects. And that's the approach that I've taught my staff to do, and I think has been a large part of the reason for our success thus far in being able to get to where we have, because some of these things are extremely daunting. You will note in the references that I've laid out for you, some illustration of that from the local government level to dealing with Washington DC, because I've been doing that for 25 years, to dealing with our federal partners, to dealing with the 2 state DOTs, to dealing with the business community, and also our relationships with RTC over the years are reflected in those references that you have in front of you. So with that, I would like to kind of wrap up here and say I'm very happy to be before you. I very much appreciate the opportunity. I look forward to your questions, and good luck on your decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. We appreciate you being here today, and we know how difficult it is to participate in these public interview processes. So we'll jump right into the question and answer, and we'll start with Mr. Mayor down at the end.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to say I'm impressed that you stuck with that area up there for the last 11 years, 10, 11 years?
11 years at the district, yes.
Yes, good for you. My question is simple. Carl, is there anything in the RTC's future or happening currently with the RTC that would trigger a conflict of interest for you?
No.
None at all?
No, there's none that I'm aware of that I have any reason for any kind of conflict of interest with the RTC.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Delgado.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hasty. I appreciate your being here and considering and applying for the position. And, your resume speaks very highly of your commitment to sticking to a project and continuing forward to see it through. So I appreciate you again for applying. My question is more around the public health standpoint. I think for many people work within their silos, but one thing for me is important is to be able to work outside of the silos in terms of how you should impact other community pieces.
Absolutely.
One of those pieces is, of course, for me, is that the built environment has a huge impact on our overall health. And so how would you look at initiatives through that healthcare lens? How would you look at projects that you propose to us in terms of how we can also fill those needs as well?
Understood.
Thank you.
Transportation is being asked to do a lot anymore, and for good reason. The one thing I've enjoyed about the transportation field is seeing just truly how cross-cutting it is when it comes to our quality of life, when it comes to providing access to the services and the job and the recreation and health that we need, and the cross-cutting aspect of what it contributes to the economic vitality of our community. And done well, it could really serve all of these needs. To that end, we do have an obligation, and I think what you heard this morning in the public comments are the types of things that we've been addressing at Tahoe for quite a bit, which is the multimodal approach to be able to offer people choices about where they're going to go and how they're going to get there. We've precluded a lot of those choices by a heavy reliance on the automobile and a domination of the automobile, which has its own health impacts, let alone activity. So I think this is the future for this area, without a doubt. It's a future for Tahoe and so many of our communities, and we have arrived at that place. The challenge is how are we going to be able to finance that and get those pieces on the ground and the public and political support to make that. Once it's done, people really enjoy it. Just like we're probably at 300,000 people enjoying that trail segment up at Incline Village right now, just since it's opened up at the end of the summer. It's been a phenomenal response. And I see the public loving this every time in whatever community you're doing it. It's a real appetite to have it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Hartung.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hasty. Your resume is definitely impressive. I agree with the mayor with respect to staying in Tahoe. It's a hard place to get things done. That said, given the growing needs of the region in general, and I'm talking regionally, and the shrinking index fuel tax, how will you lead the organization to secure additional funding sources, and how will you prioritize the growth in the region to expend those sources?
Excellent question. I mean, this is the hard question for every community. What we've been seeing at the federal level with the shrinking federal expenditure and not a prospect on the horizon of that growing anytime soon, And the trend that we've been seeing in the last 20 years around the country, which in California they call self-help, and really what this community did in 2008 is a form of self-help with going to the indexing the gas tax. It's falling more and more to us in our communities for kind of taking our own destiny in our own hands. We're approaching this in Tahoe right now and have been for the last 15 months because we've had a multimodal vision for 40 years, and the majority of it is not fulfilled because the revenues do not exist. We are underway with a process right now and have been for the last 15 months with stakeholders to identify what are the types of mechanisms can generate the gap, the revenue gap, fill the revenue gap for our RTP, especially when it comes to our transit system, because that is the single largest gap for us up there, yet it is the single biggest payoff from a multimodal aspect if you're trying to get people out of cars and deal with congestion and everything else. This community is going to be looking to do the same. I think every community in the state is going to be looking to do the same. I think this dialogue at the state level, what are we going to do at the state level potentially? Year through RTC's leadership on indexing, at least that conversation was introduced with the legislature for a couple of sessions, and a few other jurisdictions took that up, like Southern Nevada RTC most especially. It has bought time. But that time is going to run out, and we're going to have to arrive at other revenue sources that I think partially are going to be local. And we have a very important responsibility of making sure that the federal government is going to pay its fair share and not devolve any further than what is done already. It's kind of a bad precedent right now, in my opinion, on the federal side of what's been done with this Congress in the budget that they just passed for this year that also cut transit by $500 million. That's a bad precedent for where we're going to probably go to continuing resolution, because we're not going to see a reauthorized bill here in an election year. And it sets a bad template for the reauthorization. So it's going to be, we in our communities out of here and collectively out of Northern Nevada, in order to be competitive and to keep the federal government accountable, are going to have to be working with our delegation to really make sure that they're there. That's just kind of preserving that funding. I think it's still going to fall. So for us, if I were here in this position, it would be not unlike what we're having to do at Tahoe right now, of looking at what our options are. It's being able to educate our public what you get for this and what are the benefits out of doing that. So the trade-off is that you end up with a lot more control, just like you did here with indexing, of what you're going to do with those dollars. That the bureaucracy of some of these other sources really start to handcuff you quite a bit. So that's how I would approach it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Appreciate you being here. Been here all my life, and I have to say of all the candidates, I hadn't had the pleasure of ever really meeting you previously and kind of knowing of your history, but I did see your reference list. It was very, very impressive. So the question that I have been asking all the candidates is one of, to give an example of where you have brought, specifically identifying individuals and entities and jurisdictions and funding together to complete a project. I don't think I need to do that with you because you've already spoken about it, and it's certainly in your resume and your history shows that. So I'm going to change a little bit. While your reference list, I spent 20 years in human resources, and while your reference list is very impressive, oftentimes the best feedback on an individual is from someone who worked beneath them.
Yes.
If I were to, and maybe I have spoken to some of those individuals, what do you believe they would say about you?
Well, this is what I'd hope they would say. I'm not a micromanager. I have no interest in micromanaging. I like a team who's competent, confident, willing to stretch themselves and grow, and who really get engaged on wanting to provide a real value in what they do to their community. I believe that's what I've done with my team up at Tahoe. You can ask one of them who used to work with me before, Mr. Spear. And that has been a real instrumental part of our success. is the demeanor with which we conduct our business, with the competency and the integrity with which we conduct our business. I really believe in supporting my people and in growth. I kind of enjoy watching that, and I find that to be a very enjoyable aspect of being part of a team, that it's amazing what you can accomplish if you have that culture and are successful in finding those folks who thrive in that. So that's what I think you would hear from the people who work with me and who have worked with me for a long time. Many of those references, I've had relationships for 20 years or so. And it's through that, having that integrity and real honesty that you're able to do that.
Good. May I have one quick follow-up?
Please.
Why do you, we could all make assumptions as to why you want to leave the Tahoe. Can you tell us why?
I struggled with making this decision, quite honestly. I waited till the very last day to even make the final decision and submit my resume and my letter. The challenges here are extremely attractive, and as I noted, this is my home. I've got, 4 generations of my extended family living in this area, so I have very much an investment in this community, in this larger region. I understand this whole interregional aspect of this, and don't find working here and having an influence with Tahoe exclusionary. In fact, if anything, we need to strengthen that relationship, because in the end, it's going to be the types of services that are not just multimodal within our communities, but it's multimodal between our communities. So and that's where I landed, was really and that decision on that, with an interest of being closer to home. And I'm really intrigued with what's going on down here, and as I have been with RTC. So
Thank you.
Mr. Hasty, thank you. I appreciate you coming down and interviewing. You and I have met before, and
Yes.
I have sat through
yes, you have.
some very functional, sometimes, TTD meetings. It is a challenge, obviously, as you see, to interact with local governments, and you have an extensive experience between local governments and private. However, so much of our challenges, as you've pointed out here and within the region, come from self-reliancy. But we still need to attract and work with the federal government and the state government on policies and as they impact us. And as an executive director in the face of the organization, how would you propose that you would go forward with those challenges within the state and federal governments and continue to bring RTC to the forefront?
I think this is critical for RTC to be competitive. I mean, it's being cognizant of the fact that as big as people think this area is, we're not to so many communities around the country, let alone to our neighbor at the south in the state. So that approach needs to bring those interests forward. It is working with the governor's office. It is working with the legislature, both from our elected representatives here and also appealing to what we have in common. I did this when began here at TTD within the state, and unlike California, one of the things that's still kind of nice to be able to do in Nevada is we only have 5 MPOs. And working with NDOT, those MPOs get together, be it down south or down north, and we talk about what it is that we have in common, what are our challenges. So there's the competitive aspect of this, but at the same time, there's the commonality. The state has a role to play, and we need to come together with the other MPOs to be able to express that. It's also with our elected officials here in the legislature to address that. I think it's recognizing for the state, and I believe they're beginning to, now that Nevada has joined the Climate Alliance. They've also, the administration has seen that it is transportation. And dealing with transportation is where the big payoff is going to be when it comes to meeting those goals. And so I think that's going to make a very big difference in the state's opinion, both at the legislature as well as with the administration, about what assistance or what steps does the state need to do in order to help, particularly with its largest urban areas, which is here in southern Nevada. So from a state perspective, that's how I would approach this from a strategy, bringing forward to you what the steps that would be necessary or a role for you as a commission to play, let alone for us as a staff in working with others. At the federal level, what I was just speaking to a moment ago, we have reauthorization coming up at some point. It's about getting back to DC and working with our delegation, the lobbying group that you have, and so on, to make sure that the federal government, we have a very good delegation for the state of Nevada and for Northern Nevada. They're extremely interested. We really want to work with those people. I have very much seen the value of doing that when it comes to our Tahoe experience and watching that come together. And the more we can get to a bipartisan solution on that, which Nevada has a great knack of being able to do, then the more successful we're going to be, because it kind of comes back to that common interest. What's that common interest?
Great. And just a quick follow-up, as you've pointed out, there is always political differences in these arenas that we work within, being that the current administration at the state is very much different than the administration in the federal government, and the legislatures at both levels are very much different. And having those, being able to balance those, what skills and traits would you impose to make sure that those balances stay in place for us?
Well, in this position as the executive director, I feel that's very much part of my perspective that I have to keep. The way I look at my job, be it here or be it at TTD, is keeping my eye on the big picture and the outcome. Everything that we then do as a staff, and I'm teaching my staff this, everything we do, I'm kind of looking at how does that line up with where we need to go. The political arena is absolutely critical. I have kind of come to look at the approach on transportation, let alone anything on land use, is we actually have a series of publics. They don't all listen to the same message. The message has to be customized for that public. In DC, that is a whole different public arena, if you will, that responds to different prompts, different tactics. There's working within the administration, like within Federal Highways or FTA. There's working with Congress. It's seeking this alignment and promoting your solutions and agenda and the cooperation needed there. It's not unlike with other agencies, and as I noted on the 28 corridor, 13 different agencies. That was a different public that we had to speak to differently and almost get into their head about how do they think, how are they rewarded in order to address their needs and issues so we could find a win-win with everybody involved. And that's how we got to those kind of agreements. There's the general public, there's you. I mean, I've found it handy to be able to kind of think and organize things in that way and then understand our messaging and what we have to do in terms of our strategy as well as messaging to be able to pull all that together. Does that make sense?
Makes very much. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
All right, are there any follow-up? Commissioner Hartung.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hasty, the transit scenario in Tahoe is very different. You're more tourist-oriented. I don't think that you have nearly as much commuter transit or the need for commuter transit where people are trying to get around the lake to get to their jobs. I'm sure there's some, but I don't think that it's the bulk of what the transit system is designed for. That said, how will you address the transit needs in this area, understanding that places like Spanish Springs, the North Valleys, Verdi, and even Southwest Reno, I'll use Spanish Springs. I've lived there 33 years, and there is no transit in the valley.
Yep.
And so how would you approach that, and would rail even be a part of the solution for you?
Well, certainly not immediately. I mean, rail's expensive. It has its limits. It can be. And those types of things are worth looking at. I think the future, especially with what we're going to be seeing with technology and the like that, and perhaps the cost of those solutions can come down. I mean, that's a tough situation up there with not a whole lot of corridor options. So alternatives to that, similarly for going out to Trick or wherever else, are the types of solutions that may be large capital that are worth looking at. No stone should be left unturned. Our system at Tahoe, it actually is more transit dependent based. We actually carry very few tourists. That's where we need to shift, because there are big numbers that we need to get to are really on the tourist side. We do have a commute. There's about 10,000 people that commute out of the basin, about 10,000 people that commute into the basin, let alone within the basin. So we serve Minden-Gardnerville. We go over the hill. We connect Minden-Gardnerville with Carson City. So we're actually doing interregional, similar to what you're doing with your ride down to Carson City, inner city. So I think those types of solutions, we're looking at some of those up there. We're looking at passenger ferry, for example, as a way of connecting North Shore to South Shore rather than being on the highway. So those kind of creative ideas and the solutions that are there are worth looking at, spending some dollars, and then deciding through, course of informed decision-making, what's the timing? What's that going to take? What do we need to get behind? What's that going to cost? Because those may very well be the solutions, as opposed to another highway or whatever else. We can only build so much. In the end, we're going to need it all. We're going to need it all.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Mr. Hasty, thank you so much for your response time. There's not much time left, so we'll take those last 45 seconds from you and ask for you to summate your closing remarks in your 5 minutes.
Thank you. I hope I've been able to show you here today what I have to offer and bring to the table in a relatively short period of time. I do have a track record of building and keeping relationships that are critical to the achievement of goals. I do have a reputation of integrity and vision. I have a reputation of being able to build and keep a great, competent team who have been with me a long time, who are motivated by doing the greater community good. I have been accused of being creative and certainly persistent. That is what has allowed me to stay at Tahoe for as long as it is, because it absolutely requires persistence, and anything in transportation absolutely does. People think 20 years is a long time, but not in the transportation world. That's really what it takes to really gear something up, especially if you're going to get into something like light rail. I'm practiced at understanding and communicating with many of the publics that the RTC must engage. I definitely understand the leadership role that is required to keep RTC competitive nationally and within the state. And I do have a track record of delivering complex solutions in a very complex political environment. Like the TTD, the RTC is here to complement and help achieve the desired success of the communities that you as respective board members represent. You come here as commissioners together to look at a region beyond just your jurisdiction and to operate in a regional interregional system. On a personal level, as I noted, this is my home. I have a investment and stake in the long-term outcome of this, and therefore my interest. Lastly, I would like to say that it absolutely would be an honor to lead the RTC team if I should be chosen, and to work with you as a board to address the needs of our community today, while at the same time laying the groundwork for addressing those of the future. So I do really appreciate your time and consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hasty. We appreciate it. You're more than welcome to stay for the remainder. Please do. So we are on to our final interview of the day. We are going to invite Mr. Bill Thomas to come on down. We'll take a brief break for the change-up. what's important. You know. You might have. No. We're gonna hammer right there. You get donuts, and then you get the fuck out of here. Because I have a 1 o'clock haircut, and I'm gonna make that haircut.
Oh, dang.
And they have a 2 o'clock here. They have a 2 o'clock regional government board here. Yeah, we gotta go to. So, oh my God. Oh. My birthday. Oh my God, my day just got so much better. Now that we have all of our commissioners back, we want to make sure every commissioner has the opportunity to hear every interview. Mr. Thomas, we want to welcome you. You are our final interview of the day. Once again, we want to thank all of the candidates that have taken the time to participate in this public interview process. We know it's challenging, but with that, sir, the floor is yours for your 10-minute opening statement about who is Mr. Bill Thomas.
Thank you, Chairman Lucy, and thank you for sharing your birthday with us. This is special, special way to do it.
Sorry.
And commissioners, I'm very honored and humbled by the opportunity to speak to you this morning in candidacy for what I believe is one of the most important executive leadership positions in our region. I know I've worked, over the 30 years I've lived in this community, worked with each of you at different times in different situations and different contexts, but I want to use this opportunity this morning to do something I haven't really had a chance to do, which is explain who I am as a person and the breadth of my experience professionally, because these individual touches don't necessarily share that with you. I'm going to start, which in a place that's maybe a little different for a executive level conversation, and that's my first job. Immediately after getting my degree in urban regional planning, I was hired as a planning technician for a local government. The reason I bring this job up is because I learned, I believe, what's the most important attribute of being a good public servant. My job was to be the first point of contact for public when they came in to understand what was a very complex and difficult set of rules. I would have been able to make people a lot more happy if I could give them everything they wanted when they talked to me, but that wasn't really possible. But what I learned was there was one thing I could do that make people feel better about this experience, and that was be responsive. I learned that the core, in my opinion, of being a good public servant is being responsive to the public. And so that foundation, I believe, is a fundamental one in how I do business and one that's led me to, I think, be very successful in my career. I know what you're really looking for, at least in my opinion today, is to understand the breadth and the depth of the experience for each of us as candidates. And I want to share that with you at this point. So for the last 8 years, I've served as the Assistant City Manager for the City of Reno. And I'm going to talk briefly about what those responsibilities are. But before I do that, I want to share with you an experience that I think was very critical to developing me as a person and, more importantly, as a leader. I was asked by the City Council and the Mayor to step in as the acting city manager for about a 10-month period when the city was going through a leadership crisis. And I was asked by the council and the mayor to step in and to bring some normalcy and a sense of trust back to leadership. And I feel like during that 10-month period, while I learned a lot about myself, I also felt that it gave me an opportunity, which I believe I was successful at, in helping the employees who make up the organization, which is the City of Reno. More specifically in that role, I developed the city's budget, which is more than $300 million budget. I led the city through the winter flood of 2017. And not something you sign up for when you do this, I also led the city through the major social conflict when there was an incident under the arch around Columbus Day. Very much a learning experience for me, but a dynamic that I think any government leader has to be prepared for. In my current position as Assistant City Manager, I'm responsible for pretty much all the functions that the City of Reno does that would be parallel to this Executive Director position for RTC. I'm specifically responsible for the executive leadership and accountable for the Public Works Department, which does all of the roadway planning, construction, maintenance, design, traffic management, traffic engineering for the City of Reno. I'm also responsible for and accountable for all of the planning functions at the City of Reno. That includes the development of the city's master plan, the city's involvement, which is very critical in development of the Truckee Meadows Regional Plan, and lastly, the city's role, which is very important in the development of the Regional Transportation Plan. In addition, I am directly responsible for the Neighborhood Services Department, which is the city department that provides all public communications and media interactions for the City of Reno. I'm also responsible for the Information Technology Department, which is the department that provides the platform and hardware management for the city's technology. And lastly, the direct report to me is one of the direct reports to me is the property manager, wherein I give her guidance and direction on all of the purchase, sale, lease, and management of city properties. Prior to coming to the city, I served as a vice president of a civil engineering firm here in our community. I did that for 9 years. What's most important, I think, in terms of this job today is to understand that during that time I led multidisciplinary teams that were made up of planners, engineers, surveyors, other design professionals to design small and very large projects, and pretty much every one of those dealt with a transportation component. When I was a planner and responsible for the advanced planning function of the City of Reno, I was the team lead for a group that wrote the state's first traffic impact fee. And that was developed working with traffic engineers and legal consultants. And in fact, as a result or as a part of that project, I also lobbied the legislature as a subject matter expert in a team that got the legislature to approve the enabling legislation for impact fees. I also spent 4 years running my own company. And the reason I bring that up, and I won't get the detail, is because this is another foundational point for me in my career. I don't know how other people deal with it, but the thing that was most eye-opening and most comforting to me was when I ran my own business and I had to feed my family. It taught me something that you can't learn in school, and that's self-reliance. I learned that when I can be confident in myself, going out and finding clients and being responsive to those clients and getting their work done and being paid for it, it made me feel very comfortable about my abilities and skills. And the reason I bring that up is because I think any great leader has to be able to get past fear and uncertainty. And I think the only way any of us as human beings do that is to have self-reliance and self-comfort that we can push past things we're not comfortable with. I wanted to, I know I'm running out of time here, just touch on a couple things I've done recently to demonstrate my ability to lead. I was responsible for development of a new $33 million public safety center, funding and construction of a $4 million police station, creation of a $250,000 clean and safe team to deal with the health issues associated with encampments. I led the group that transformed the Transitional Governing Board on Homeless into the Community Homeless Advisory Board. I worked with a team that remodeled the National Bowling Stadium with a very limited budget and a limited amount of time. I worked with the mayor in developing her 1,000 home program, which generated an interest of over 4,000 homes in construction in the next 18 months. I worked with the Community Foundation to develop the first community affordable housing land trust. And this is one I'm particularly proud of. I worked with 2 private individuals to basically conceive the Village on Sage Street project. And with those 2 other partners, we were able to build, I think, a very large coalition of people to get that project constructed. I was one of the principal leaders in developing the University Gateway Plan that brought together not only the university and the city, but also RTC. And then lastly, I was part or a leader of the team that developed the city's first master plan in 20 years, the Reimagine Reno project. So in closing, I want to talk about my interest in this position. I'm a very passionate person about this community. I've lived here 30 years. I'm not a native, but I feel like I am because I've never lived anywhere as long as I have. I'm not going anywhere. I raised my family here. This is my home. I think this position, as I said earlier, is one of the most important leadership positions in developing our community. And I feel like my career, everything that I've experienced at this point, puts me at a unique spot to be able to help this organization be successful. And that's why I'm a candidate for this position. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. I appreciate that. We'll jump right into the Q&A section at this time. So with that, we will jump down to Mayor Smith.
Thank you, Bill, for that presentation, comprehensive. Good job on that. Appreciate it. I have a simple question, and this is it. Is there anything in RTC's future or happening currently with the RTC that would trigger a conflict of interest for you?
I don't think so. I mean, I have which I know has been expressed publicly. I have basically, I worked for 4 years helping develop a piece of property, a very large piece of property, called Evans Ranch. As part of the compensation for that effort, which is often the case in the private sector, I was offered an opportunity for a percentage of the profits if that property developed. I was never given any ownership. I was never given any right to the property. You'll never find my name on the title, but I had an opportunity to benefit if that ever gets developed. When I was hired at the City of Reno as the assistant city, well, actually as community development director, I talked specifically with the city manager and disclosed that fact to him. And I said to him, is this something that would warrant concern on your part or be an issue? He said it wasn't. I then went to the city attorney and asked the city attorney, is this a conflict that would preclude me from being a public servant working in the world of permitting and design and planning? And the city attorney said no, and in fact issued me a letter saying there was no conflict of interest. I have, for over 8 years now, disclosed publicly, as I know all of you do, and I was required to do as an appointed official, the fact that I had the relationship on this property. And I have, where there's situations which are consistent with the city attorney's advice, I've excused myself for conversations on things related to Evans Ranch. So I know there's been, and I apologize to all of you because I think this is really about this organization and the other people here today that are here for this interview and not about the person who tried to intercede, but I apologize on my part for being part of that coming up. But I feel very comfortable that there is no conflict, and in fact, what I would do if you selected me is sit down with your attorney, disclose all the facts related to that relationship, and provided the partners who signed the agreement, I would even publicly present the agreement. I think people can probably understand when you work and you put your effort into something and you're going to get rewarded for it, it feels like it's something that you should be able to retain. I would give that up if you told me that was necessary, but I feel like it's not really a conflict and it's something that I had to earn, and I think my family has a right to, so that's why I retained it.
Thank you for the answer, Bill. Thank you.
Commissioner Delgado.
Great presentation, Bill. Thank you for considering the position at RTC. My question is the same question I've asked all the other candidates, and it revolves around healthcare. For me, you know, as we all know, healthcare is a big part of who I am and what I do. With respect to development and urban planning, we both know through your background as well as the built environment has a direct impact on the overall health of a community, and being proactive about what that looks like now is very important to me. Considering the position of RTC, how would you anticipate bringing in healthcare through that lens in terms of our initiatives, projects, or anything else that's forthcoming to improve the quality of life in many of our communities?
Thank you for that question. I think I would start with the direct connection of the transportation system for those who are in our community that don't have a choice or an alternative to get to medical care. Because I firmly believe that the issue for people, particularly those who need the attention of a professional, is having access to those services. And I know there's people in our community that do not own cars, do not have the ability to drive a car, perhaps can't afford to order a taxi every time. So I think that's a very critical part of what we need to do as a community. And I think it's foundation on which we want to be proud of our community by providing that service. I think secondarily, there's the issue which was mentioned earlier about behaviors and activities to make us healthier. In other words, creating an environment where people would, for example, walk more or ride more, I think helps long-term because potentially it helps people from being in a position where they need the immediate health care. And then I would say lastly, as far as public health, I think we can't ignore the pedestrian safety issue. My research, what I found is that while people's injuries and deaths from automobile accidents have been going down, injuries and deaths from pedestrian activity have been going up. And I think that's an issue we need to be, keep in our forefront of our minds and look at strategies to deal with that. So that would be my answer specifically. I think part of what we probably should do is a direct conversation with all the healthcare providers to see to what degree RTC can help in terms of people getting those critical services they need.
Thank you. Commissioner Herta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Thomas, your background speaks for itself. I mean, you've been in the community for a long time and had your hands in a lot of things in the community, as we all have. It's the nature of living here for 30 or 40 years. So I completely understand. But my question revolves around funding. And as you have lived, funding is it's difficult for all of us these days. Given the growing needs in the region and the shrinking indexed fuel tax, how will you approach and lead the organization to secure additional funding sources? And then how will you prioritize the needs in the region given the rapid growth and the limited amount of funding that we have?
Wish that I had one answer where we could find that pot of money, but I do think it's this is the biggest issue we're facing. We all know that the needs grow faster than the resources. I think the first thing that I would do, and one that we should constantly do, is look at how we do things. And what I mean by that is, over time, any organization can develop inefficiencies and maybe processes that made sense at one point but no longer do. I think as part of that, looking at it internally in RTC, I would also look at our relationship with the local governments to see if there's overlap. Are there things we're doing where RTC touches it and the city of Sparks touches it and then the city of Reno touches it and we're all spending staff time to do it? Can we find efficiencies whereby one of us, because I know we certainly should be in a place where any of the three local governments trust RTC as the accountable party for doing something. Can we find efficiencies there? Now, that's probably a small and incremental element, but it's critical not only for our operations, but as you all know, when we ask the public for more money, that's the first question they ask. How are you spending it now? So I think once we get past that, I really believe, particularly in the area that I think I see as very challenging, which is funding the operation and maintenance of transit, I think we need to maybe step back a bit. And I think what we need to do is we need to be able to tell the story to our community. What is the benefit of transit? I've heard, being here 30 years, and I'm sure all of you hear it, ever since I moved here, what I hear from people is, why are we paying for transit? There's nobody on the bus. And I hear that over and over again. And so I feel like we, RTC as an organization, need to figure out how do we message to the community the value of transit. What are the discrete and specific things that we can do with transit that help people? Whether it's the story of an individual who would not be able to get to health care if they didn't have it, or someone else who's able to get to a job that didn't have it. Those kind of messages that get the public to want to support it. Because I believe, personally, watching over the years, that the days of going to the public and saying, you know, this is really screwed up and it's really a problem, we want your money, are gone. I think we're at the point now where we have to show the public the value of their dollar. And the way we do that is to describe very specifically what and who gets the benefit from transit. So I think that's kind of the first step, because at the end of the day, whether it's federal money, state money, or local money, we have to convince the people who are paying it, which is the public, right? At the end of the day, that's where the same people are coming up with the money, whether it's federal money, state money, or local money. I do think once we can develop a message like that, that will be powerful with us to go forward at the federal level and see if we can get creative and unique funding by showing we're doing something unique or different in terms of the way we present transit. It's a challenge in terms of the gas tax, because we all know that as cars get more efficient, as we move towards other technologies, there's going to be a shrinking revenue from gasoline sales. And I know at the state level, there's conversations about coming up with a new way, whether it's a voter registration charge or something else. And I think we need to be very much in the forefront of that to make sure that we're in the conversation about how do we come up with the money at a minimum that we need to take care of the roads that people are going to be driving on. And hopefully to pay for the transit, which is so critical to building a great community.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I did want to make a statement, and then I'll get into my question. And I appreciated Mayor Smith's opening question with regards to a alleged conflict of interest. And I did want to say I appreciated your response. I know that you gave that clarification years ago. You disclose it annually. It's nothing that you've hidden. You put it on your resume. You have been very forthright, and you have a 20-year public service career that you should be very, very proud of. I'm sad it was attacked in the way it was. It shouldn't have even been a subject of discussion today, and I'm disgusted that it was.
Thank you.
So, moving on to my question. When we went out with the definition of what we were looking for, attributes, experiences, education, you can imagine, as you saw, it was very, very diverse. In addition to that, we went out and asked the public, what did they want to see in their next executive director? And the responses that we got from that were very diverse as well. I'm going to ask you a question, but it's going to have some specific questions within it. So if you need me to repeat it, I certainly will. Can you please provide an example of a time, or multiple times, when you have led, not been a part of, but led the effort to bring together diverse individuals, jurisdictions, entities, politicians together, and funding for that effort to bring a project to fruition?
Certainly, thank you for that question. So I'm going to give you two examples. The first one is one that really covers all those, and the second one maybe not so much the funding part, but I think more so the regional cooperation and larger groups getting together. About maybe 3 years ago, it was very clear in the city of Reno that our downtown area needed to have something done to deal with the continuing state of decline and blight. So I led a conversation with the city manager and the city council, and got the initial authorization to explore changing what was an assessment district that had gone on for many years into a new tool, which was a business improvement district. So I got together and led a group of staff that came together with not only the technical, because there's a lot of technical data that needed to be done to be able to stand this up. Got that done on time and was completed, but I also led the work with a very diverse group of people to create what was basically a self-tax. And I think all of you know, whenever you talk about tax, that's a hard sell for anybody. But this was going to be a self-tax of the people in the business district downtown to create this new tool for dealing with some of the blight in that area. As part of that conversation, it was made up of not only the stakeholders who were going to be paying, but also the residents who lived in the downtown, and that's been an ever-increasing number of people. Traditionally, it was mostly the businesses that dominated downtown, but there's a lot more people living down there. And in addition, we reached out to the city council and the county commission, and basically as broad of a group as we could to come together as a coalition to say that this business improvement district is what the community needed. Not just the downtown, but the new community broadly, because for many years, what I know the council's been hearing and I've been hearing from people that live here is that they didn't want to come downtown because they felt unsafe and they felt like it was blighted. So this particular effort led to the formation of the Business Improvement District, and proud to say we actually beat Las Vegas, who was trying to do the same thing and got done well ahead of them. Started after them, but beat them to the punch. And more importantly, that Business Improvement District very quickly transitioned to the Reno, trying to remember what, Reno Downtown Partnership, sorry. Acronyms are all over our world. Which then led to the Ambassador Program, which I would represent to anybody who questions it with the demographics and the information they present has done an amazing job at changing the way people feel about downtown Reno. There's argument about whether it solves the problem or not, but everybody that I've talked to has said it's a much more friendly, more open, safer feeling downtown. So I'm very proud of my personal efforts, but like everything I do, it wasn't me. It was me maybe catalyzing other people to become participants and work together to get this resolved. So the second one, I don't want to waste too much or spend too much more time on this, is the city of Reno got a grant from IBM, and we got a grant that was only given to 7 places throughout the world. It was called the IBM Smarter Cities Grant. That grant came to the city of Reno. It could have very well have been just a city of Reno thing where the city of Reno went out, had these very high-end professionals come here for 2 weeks to tell us how to do things. But very early on, I and a couple of the key people that were working with me decided that this was only going to have value if it was done regionally. And that if we as a community coming out of the recession decided what our future was, that was what was going to have value. I believe that effort, from what I saw, and I'll use Mayor Smith, an example of how I believe this was successful. What started as a City of Reno project very quickly became championed by the city manager from Sparks. And it gave us in this venue and through this project, not only a connection that I think was stronger than we'd had in a while between the 3 local governments, but it also brought in the university. And it brought in the school district. And it brought them in a way where we weren't throwing stones at each other, but we all realized coming out of the recession, we needed a new image. We needed to say what we were as we were going forward as a community. And I'm personally very proud that the answer wasn't really from anybody who was on that team, but really going out to the public and getting confirmation that we wanted to be a knowledge-based economy. And I think that, one thing like that doesn't make something happen. I think it was the first time where we all got together with a common purpose and were able to come up with a vision for our region. So that one I'm very proud of. It could have gone a very different way, but I think it went the right way. And I think it went the right way not only for me personally or the staff of the city of Reno, but I think for our region.
Mr. Thomas, you're going to have to be quick here, I guess, on this last question for me.
So yes, no answer.
Yeah, I wish. As you've pointed out today, through your years of experience within the region, you have a very wide range of understanding as it pertains to local government. But many of the challenges that and the understanding that the RTC of Washoe is a very self-reliant organization. However, often do we have to work with the state and also the federal government, from the DOT, the FTA, the FHWA, many organizations. But also we have to work with the leaderships of those organizations. The administrations currently at the state, the legislature, the administration in Washington, D.C., and delegation on the Capitol Hill. How do you see yourself being an advocate for the RTC in those arenas and maintaining the balance when there's a multitude of different opinions and making sure that the focus and the goals and the mission of the RTC are realized?
I would start with, as you pointed out, I've got a lot of experience and had a lot of opportunities to be in different situations where I work with varying groups of elected officials. I would start out by saying that I feel as a person, and each of us is different, how we're raised and who we are as people. I feel like I have a talent for working with people to gain their trust and their respect. And I think that's probably the most important thing in my experience when you're dealing with anybody, is that initial conversation, that contact, that developing of a relationship is really what's meaningful, because at the end of the day, what you're asking, there's not technical answers. You can't go to a congressman or a senator and say, here's the math, here's the diagram, this is what you need to do. You have to make a connection with them, and I think what most importantly you have to do is show them how whatever the item is that you're lobbying or trying to get approved benefits the people of our area. Because I can guarantee you, at the end of the day, they understand that they're representing, for example, our delegation, the same people that each of you are representing, right? At the end of the day, we're all helping the same people, but delivering the message in a way that's clear and delivering it in a way that they believe in, and them believing that we're going to perform on based on what we tell them is most critical. So that would be my approach in terms of how we deal with the federal level. I think from the state level, it's basically the same thing, but obviously a little more focused, because we have the issue of spreading state resources and being able to compete with other areas. So I think it's really about not making it a competition, but really how whatever the money is or the resources we're looking for, how it benefits us as a state. And then I know I'm going a little over here, but to get to the local level, having seen it from one perspective, particularly from RTC in terms of the fact that we get a bucket that's only so big, it's not as simple as doing a formula. If it were, then there wouldn't ever be any argument and no one would ever feel like they're being shorted. I think we have to do both from a regional standpoint, a formula and a method we all agree on, but we also have to look at individual projects and see what's the level of sincerity, what's the level of interest, and what's the consequence if we don't, as a region, help one of our other local partners. Because every jurisdiction's issues are gonna, move around and wax and wane, but at the end of the day, if a local government has a real need, I think we as a region need to evaluate that and step up. Whether it meets a formula or it's the answer we've always done, I think we have to be open to looking at individual situations, and that's how we build trust with each other.
Great. Thank you so much for that answer. I appreciate that. All right, I will give you, I'm going to take about a minute from you, but you have about 4 minutes to wrap up. If you'll wrap up very quickly so we can stay on task here, but.
I will throw out one of my note cards. How's
Just
that?
one? Okay. The floor is yours for your closing statement, sir.
Thank you. So again, I really am excited about this opportunity. I feel like, being a person who's been here for 30 years, we're at a very unique time. I think every community has these peak times where the future is defined by what you do or don't do. I know right now from my own personal experience, not a week goes by that somebody doesn't contact me that wants to invest in our community. We went from the lowest of lows during the recession to being on the top of lists, and we've got people. I had a guy from the largest economic development magazine of Germany come and do an interview. So when we're being presented in magazines in Germany, we know people are looking at us. The question's going to be, what do we do with that? What do we do with that attention, those jobs, the economic activity, even though people might talk negatively about the consequence? I feel personally like this is our shining moment. This is our moment to shape the future. And the transportation network, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, it makes up 80% of the public infrastructure. So what we do with transportation, how we build it, where we build it, how we use it, is very important to what our people feel daily in terms of their experience. And it's also something that's very important in the message to the people who want to invest in our community. So I think we can't overemphasize the value of our transportation network and our economic development. As was said earlier, we know that our needs way exceed our resources. I'm of the firm belief that the only way we're going to do this as we grow beyond 500,000 people is we have to work together regionally We have to work together with our delegation, with our state legislature, with our neighboring sister counties that are kind of in the same boat as us, to come up with solving very complex problems. And to be quite honest, because I've worked with pretty much every elected board, every appointed board, every commission that's been created, I personally believe that the RTC board, the five of you, are the group that's demonstrated the greatest ability to cooperate and coordinate. And I feel as we move into the future where that's going to become so critical, we're going to need leadership. We're going to need a board or a group of people that says this is how you do it. And to be honest, I want to be part of that. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. All right, so that concludes all of our interviews at this time. So what I'm going to do is bring it back to the board. I'm going to ask really quickly, do we have any public comment signed in?
We do not.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So since we have no public comment signed in, I'm going to ask, we're going to open this for some brief deliberations between the board members, some comments. I would ask that we do keep this brief and so that we can try to stay on task, and then we will jump right into the voting process. So, do I have some comments from anybody who would like to go first? Madam Vice Chair?
I'm back to work. Thank you. I just want to give a huge thanks to everybody that participated and for helping to put this all together, everybody that's been a part of getting this out to the greater community to advertise for it and get some amazing candidates in. You know, I know we spent a lot of time looking over the resumes and the experience before we even got here today. And then, of course, the interviews have all been just phenomenal, just truly, truly phenomenal. And I do want to say a visual yesterday that kind of boiled it down for me as to what was so amazing about this community is whoever we choose, we all live, love, eat, drink, ride here, and we're going to be part of shaping what this amazing future is. And yesterday at a council meeting that went really, really long, there wasn't a whole lot of people left in chambers, but Bill and John were sitting together. And that was just, to me, just an example of two people that were going to be competing for a new position. And they were, you know, and I'm sure whatever happens today, the same thing will occur. So I just want to thank everybody through this process because it really has been a pleasant one. I have my process that I use when I evaluate people, and I use a four-prong approach. I take into consideration your education, your experience, how you did in your interview, and my gut. And then I weight that, and then I rank. So I have done that, and we'll be selecting accordingly.
Great, thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Commissioner Hartung.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is just in the order that we saw our candidates. Mr. Flansburgh, there's no doubt that you have a robust transportation background. You've been in the region for a long time. I like the idea of your concept of the customer experience. I also like the idea that you mentioned that you're not Reno-centric, but a regional thinker and collaborator. That was impressive for me. Mr. Hassan, who is not in the audience, has a diverse background, worked as a driver, capital projects manager in Hawaii and Alaska. He now works for us at Keolis. He mentioned that he was a facilitator, not an engineer, not a planner, which is interesting. That was an interesting position to take. Ms. Cummings, my goodness, your wealth of knowledge in the organization is unsurpassed. I mean, there's just no question how much you know about the organization. You've had your fingerprints on things for a very long time. You and I have worked together for quite a number of years. So I appreciate what you bring to the table. Very, very impressive. Mr. Hasty, his experience working with multiple agencies and multiple organizations, understanding how to fill the revenue gaps, and his relationships in DC and other places. What an asset that is. I mean, there's just no question that he would bring a lot to the table. Mr. Thomas, 30 years. You've been here, you and I have worked together on numerous projects. I can't even begin to enumerate all the times that you and I have met and worked collaboratively. I know you personally as having good, strong leadership skills, and I understand, and I know that you understand what challenges we're going to face in the future with respect to our funding needs and our resources. And but I think you have a good grasp of understanding, and your leadership skills are certainly on par with anyone in the region. So, as you can tell, I've not made up my mind yet. Thank you.
Commissioner Delgado.
Thank you, Chairman. I too want to thank all the candidates that applied. It's interesting that everyone is local, and in terms of going out nationally looking for it, and it's the talent that we have here. I mean, the talent is amazing, and it's all shown throughout the resumes and also through the conversations and the questions that we've asked. And I think Vice Chair Jaron said it well, that we're going to be in great hands. We're going to be in great hands no matter what, especially filling those big shoes that Mr. Lee Gibson has left us. I too have my process very similar to Councilwoman Jardin's, and that's education's experience, the wealth of knowledge, leadership, and ultimately the gut in terms of what this organization needs at the moment, regionally speaking, in terms of how we move forward with so many of the issues that are coming before us, with the challenges, but also the opportunities and potential to make sure that we deliver for our community. I too am getting through the process as we speak right now, but ultimately just want to thank everyone for the process and for applying. This is a tough job, very much a political job, and it's very much going to be under the microscope of our community to make sure we do what's in their best service. So thank you to everyone that's applied, and look forward to working with you. If we don't choose you, it's thank you for applying, and look forward to working with everyone. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the candidates for their individual responses and individual ideas, and all the ideas that you came up with. It proves that you think regionally. I know John said it right out loud, and this is a regional committee. A lot of people forget that, and they start thinking about their own entities, and that makes it hard. But I feel this board has worked together. Well, I've been on the board since 2008, so I feel that this board has worked together to solve problems, to realize that it is a regional board. And I just think that every one of you candidates deserve to be our executive director, but we can only pick one. So I want to thank you for being here today, and I certainly do appreciate your honesty and everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to share the same sentiments. I took copious notes today. This has been a wonderful process. The amount of professionalism that has been exhibited by all the candidates today through a very arduous process has been tremendous. I appreciate the time that you've taken out of your busy days to participate in this and go through this. It's tremendous to see the level of experience that we are very fortunate with. I've sat at this dais for 5 years now, and I've said that transportation really is the most important and most dynamic discussion and topic within our region. It is the start of every development. It's how we move people through in the continual life here, and how we continue to serve a quality of life. But for me, it's always about who the best leader is always going to be. I hire the person, not the job. I've always said that. I've said it in my private business. I've said it from this dais when we've hired many individuals for this for Washoe County. So with that being said, I want to thank you all for participating. It's been great. This has been amazingly well done. So with that, I'll leave it there. We are going to now, being no further discussion, what I'm going to do is ask that all the commissioners, your ballots are on your desk. If you could fill out your ballots, mark your 2 selections from today, sign the bottom. Ms. Zev is going to come walk by behind me and pick up the ballots from each commissioner and then deliver them to the clerk. And she then will tally those ballots, and then we will place those ballots on the screen, and then she will read those off. Quick, it'll be quick.
Commissioner Hartung voted John Flansburgh. Sorry, I'm writing as I go. And Bill Thomas. Vice Chair Jardin voted Amy Cummings and Bill Thomas. Mayor Smith voted Amy Cummings and Bill Thomas. Commissioner Delgado voted Bill Thomas and John Flansburgh. And Chairman Lucy voted Carl Hasty, where are you? And Bill Thomas. Let me total those up.
Yeah, I'll let you put that in, we can put that into a form really quickly, and we'll put those votes up on the screen. But from my counts, we have a clear and present nominee for the position. That individual is Mr. Bill Thomas. And so at this time, I'm be looking for a motion to, and I'm going to draft this motion for you so we can get it on the record properly, that we enter into negotiations with Mr. Bill Thomas as the next executive director of the Regional Transportation Commission, and that Zev and myself will negotiate those terms of those contracts to be ratified at the next board meeting of the RTC.
Second.
All right.
That's as good a motion
Does that work
as
for
any.
you? All right, I have a motion. I have a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. 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 All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Mr. Thomas, congratulations. Madam Vice Chair, look like you have some comments.
I say thank you, and
Yes.
to all of my peers who are here, thank you for participating too.
Yeah, and just huge thanks to everybody. Again, not an easy process, and one that, but I valued it very much, and I look forward to working with everybody and the staff in particular. You guys are where the rubber meets the road, literally, and we're thankful for everybody. We do need to take a moment, and we need to sing happy birthday.
No, we don't. No,
Yes,
we're all
we
on-
do.
We're on a timeline. We have to get going.
Well, that's why we're gonna do it quick.
Can we do it on the mic?
No.
Yes, we are. And we have a cake, and we would like everybody to have a piece of the cake. We are celebrating 58
Yeah,
years old.
58. yes.
58? Is that?
Looks
As you can see, the hair you guys have caused.
It looks great for 58. Okay, ready? We're gonna start singing. Ready? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy
Birthday, dear Bobby. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. It's an honor. It's an honor to be with you all on my birthday. I was looking forward to a special meeting on my birthday because I enjoy public service all so much. So thank you. This is it's an honor to serve and be part. This is great. Thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate it. So before we go, you want to take a picture of my birthday with that? Is that what you're trying to do here?
I can if you like.
No, I don't like. Well, let me do this. Let me conclude the meeting really quick, and then we can move on to this.
Yes.
We will. We'll do that right at the end. So, seeing that I have no other further public comment signed in for the final public comment, we are adjourned from the special meeting of February 13th. Thank you very much.